Today, we have call to order items of interest from the commissioners on the agenda. Then we'll have a consent agenda consideration of minutes from June 9th. And then we have a hearing and recommendation. That's the revised growth scenarios report. And then after that, we will have the comprehensive plan update work session continuation and hopefully adjourned by 8:15 or 8:30 to thereabouts. If you're here for the hearing today or you wish to testify on the revised growth scenarios hearing report, please fill out a testimony card and provide it to Julie. Testimony today will be 2 minutes, and we'll hold the 2 minutes because we want to get through the growth scenarios report and hear the testimony, have our comments, and make a recommendation, and then we'll move on to the comprehensive plan update. Again, that is a work session, and it will not be taking testimony for the work session. Items of interest from the commissioners. Chris?
So I want to report on a bike ride I went on about a week and a half ago. It was part of Pedalpalooza, our annual bicycle festival, and it was called the Missing Middle Housing Ride. And it featured a lot of the duplexes, triplexes, garden apartments that a lot of people in Portland like to live in, but we don't build anymore. And it was focused on the policy aspects of why this stuff doesn't get built. It's either not legal or in places where it is legal, it's typically more profitable to put up a 4-story apartment building. So an interesting housing type that integrates well with our neighborhoods, but that we're not building any more of. So interesting policy topic, and I think you got several letters of testimony against the growth scenarios report from people who are on that ride and are interested in expressing their opinions. So that's where those came from.
Good. Howard?
I have the recent edition of a magazine called The Monocle. It's published in Britain. It's been published for, I think, about 20 years, focusing on design, lifestyle, and rock and roll good times. And once in a while, the magazine takes a shot at livability. And so here is the magazine's global 25 best cities to live in. The first one is Tokyo. And it goes down the list of Vienna, Sydney, Vancouver. The last one on the list I want to read to you of this global salute from Monocle magazine is Portland, Oregon, who says it's the only U.S. city to break into the top 25. Just. Portland in Oregon has carved out a comfortable niche as it treads a different path to its more famous cousins. It continues to impress, but it's got work to do. So then I go over to the description of Portland, and the last item I'll read from it says that Portland has gone from obscurity to an exemplar of good U.S. urban life. Farmers markets, restaurants overflow with hallucinogenic bounty thanks to the Willamette Valley, and as important, urban sprawl controls have preserved the land. The music and art scene are on the go, while 2 hours drive reaches either skiing or the Oregon's beaches. The secret's out. The city is in the midst of a boom with mega projects such as Hasselo on 8th, I don't know why they picked that, 600 apartments and 4,000 square feet of retail in a once desolate corner of the central city. Portland still retains its title as the cheapest major left coast city, but with housing prices up 8% a year, that party may be ending. If planning leaves room for the city's signature quirky style, this star could keep its bohemian twinkle. It says public transport should continue into the night. Neighborhoods in the city's fringes should receive basic amenities such as pavements, and also don't let the city's treasured quirkiness be ruined by escalating property prices. Congratulations, Portland.
Thank you.
Maybe add a quirky chapter to the compliment?
I'm going to add a quirky chapter to the compliment.
Don? Oh, Mike, I didn't see you.
It's okay.
Cool. Yeah, today is Tuesday.
I thought it was. It's okay.
I went out and met with David Douglas School District. I got to kind of tag along with our staff here, And the purpose of the meeting with Superintendent Grotti and his staff, was to talk about their growth and talk about where they might expand school facilities. And planning and sustainability staff did a great job of kind of framing the issues. Parks was invited along, their real estate acquisition folks. PDC was at the table. It was a real good collaborative effort and the start of an effort. And so that's going to continue on. Our next meeting, I think, is in September to follow up and talk about the sites further. But, you know, it makes me realize their need is very real, very real. Their student population is growing, and they're trying to do the best they can to accommodate it. So I wanted to pass that information on.
Mike?
Yeah, Director Anderson may mention this as well. There was a meeting this afternoon with the mayor regarding his trip to the Vatican to talk with the Pope about climate change and human trafficking. And I'll just mention, I read the encyclical, and I was really blown away by how parallel a lot of the language is in that regarding, for example, intrinsic value of nature, a whole bunch on climate change, obviously. Quite a discussion on biodiversity, including the need to not just focus on the charismatic megafauna, but the uncharismatic megafauna like fungi and bacteria and so forth. And even comment on environmental impact analysis. And finally, at the end, I thought gave a really great description of what makes a bad city and what we need to do to create cities that are livable and lovable. And I think that's one of the messages I'm sure the mayor will carry forward. You can probably remember all the cities. There were 3 or 4 in the U.S. and then a bunch internationally. Anyway, it was very inspiring reading. I'd recommend taking a look at it.
Other comments? Susan?
Just to build on what Mike said, that the mayor will be going to Rome on the 21st of July. They have a 2-hour audience. There's 16 mayors from around the world going. Most of those cities, probably 13 of them, have a goal of an 80% reduction in carbon emissions by 2050. So at this point, there are 17 cities in the world that have that. We are one of them. And that was why we were asked to be a part of this. And so I think what's notable about the list is most of those cities are sort of mega cities, Seoul and large cities and not Portland size. And I think the meeting today that Mike mentioned, there were 24 people, sort of a mix of environmental advocates, very much folks from various faith groups and social activists, looking at how these things are all tied together and that you can't have environmental justice without economic justice. And so I think that will be the mayor's primary message. Tomorrow, in keeping with the same message, we have the Climate Action Plan at City Council. And I believe both Mike Houck and Chris Smith will be at that. There are probably 20 people who have asked to be invited testimony from all ranges, from utility representatives to neighborhood representatives to industry. And I think it will be a really good conversation. I'm hoping and that there will be a little bit of controversy in terms of, I know there will be people who say that it's gone too far, but I also am pretty sure that there will be many people there that says this has not gone quite far enough. And I think there'll be some reflection from some people who have been working on this for decades, saying that this used to be, an environmental kind of fringe issue 2 decades ago when we first went to this, and now we realize it's not just a primary environmental strategy, but it's a core economic development and job strategy for the city and internationally. So that's what's happening tomorrow at council.
Other comments? No? Consent agenda? Is there a motion?
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes from June 9th, 2015. All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Nope. Passes. Revised growth scenarios report. Again, this is a hearing. If you wish to testify, please fill out a testimony card, provide it to Julie. You will have 2 minutes after the presentation by Tom Armstrong. Tom?
Thank you. I also have with me Tyler Bump from our staff, who was instrumental in helping pull together this update. If you recall, back in 2013, we had the first version of this report that looked at 4 different growth scenarios. This is actually task 3 of our periodic review program that was to look at alternative growth patterns and what they meant for the city. And so what we've done here and what we'll present tonight is we've built on those 4 scenarios by including an analysis of the proposed plan, the proposed land use plan, and have now brought in the citywide systems plan and 20 years of infrastructure investment to begin to look at how not only where we grow, but how we invest in our systems, in our transit system, and our bikes, and how that impacts many of the performance measures that were identified in the Portland plan that is sort of the evaluation half of this. And so this presentation is really split into 2 pieces. One is talking about the growth pattern that we find in the proposed plan, and then the second half is just making some highlights on a few of the performance measures, and then if you want to dig deeper into the other performance measures, we can. Just to revisit, we are looking at a 2035 growth forecast that looks at adding 123,000 households and 142,000 jobs. This is coordinated with the Metro Regional Forecast that was adopted in 2013. Metro is currently going through their process to adopt a new regional forecast by the end of this year. These numbers don't really change that much. They're plus or minus a couple thousand. So, we're still pretty well consistent coordinated with that. I will say with those numbers and with the current debate at Metro and around the capacity of the urban growth boundary to grow and, can Portland do this? One of the things that we have looked at is, especially on the residential household growth side, is if you take our growth trend for the last 15 years and run it out to 2035, we're pretty much on a steady trend line to meet that growth forecast. So it looks like a big number, but it's certainly within our means to keep up with past trends over the last 15 years to get there. Again, looking at, and in the previous growth scenario report, we were looking at the capacity under our existing comprehensive plan, and now we're bringing that up to date with the land use changes in the comprehensive plan map. They don't change our residential capacity that much in terms of where and how we can grow. I think the overall message is the same, which is we have a lot of zone capacity to grow, and the question is, from a policy emphasis or from an infrastructure analysis or even development trends, where do we focus that growth and what are our choices to do? Especially, and this growth scenario report is really focused on the residential side and the choices we have to make there. And with that, most of those choices involve the multifamily side of the capacity, because that's where 85% of our capacity to grow is, and where we expect 80% of that growth to be is in the form of multifamily development. And most of that is in the central city and our mixed-use centers and corridors along Interstate Light Rail, or in Hollywood, or in Gateway, or along 82nd Avenue. That's really where, at least in terms of land use and zoning capacity, we're set up to grow. So the way our growth model works is we look at where do we have capacity to grow and where are we likely to grow, especially in terms of recent development trends. And we sort of looked at two different phases of development. One sort of pre-Great Recession, where we were seeing a lot of growth in the Central City, a lot of growth out in East Portland. The West Hills pops up because of the Forest Heights development in this time frame. The interesting thing is that, you know, even before the Great Recession hit, we started to see the development permit activity in East Portland fall off. So that the market was already shifting before the Great Recession hit. And then post-recession, as we recover, as we all are pretty familiar with, most of that, most of the recent development trends have been in the Central City and in the inner neighborhoods close to downtown, that sort of inner ring district that we've identified in the Urban Growth Framework Plan. Just to revisit what we looked at beforehand, were 4 different alternative scenarios, a mix of centers and corridors, and then one particularly focusing development, really amping up development in the Central City. Now we have the proposed plan, this is the urban growth concept, you know, that is focused on the Central City and a series of town centers and regional centers all connected by corridors, and that's what we've really used. So we take this framework of centers and corridors, where we have expect to have the zone capacity to grow and the development trends, and that's sort of the 3 factors that go into our growth distribution model. This is a sort of a heat map that where the existing households are today and the densities, with the highest densities in the Central City and downtown and Northwest Portland. And you can see some moderate densities in the inner east side neighborhoods. And then when we layer on top of that 25 years of growth, you begin to see the hot spots pop up along the corridors. This is Interstate, this is MLK, this is the Hollywood District, this is Powell, Hawthorne, the Lentz area, Gateway, and you can really see how that development pattern that is focusing that new density along our centers and corridors really becomes to pop out. And we have West Portland and the Southwest Barber corridor down here and Hillsdale there. Here's another way of looking at that distribution. This is total growth, where we are in 2035. This is how this is the actual incremental growth and how that gets distributed. Another way of looking at it, you know, we talked about in the comp plan the idea that 30% of the new growth goes in the Central City, about 50% of it goes to the centers and corridors, and the other 20% goes to other parts of the city and the residential neighborhoods. This is the current distribution there. Only about 10% of our households are actually in the Central City, and that when you layer on the growth and look at where we wind up in 2035, there's a lot of growth going to the Central City, but it still only makes up 15% of the households in 2035. And you know, the incremental change is not that much for the way we're growing. And we'll revisit this as part of this is, you know, we have 2/3 of the households that'll be here in 2035 are already on the ground today. And that has a huge influence on our growth pattern and how it performs and how we expect it to perform in 2035. Another way of looking at this is by district and where we expect that to grow. And you can see, you know, here's another way of looking at the sort of the expectations we have for the Central City. We still have a lot of growth expected out in East Portland, just not as much as we thought. The sort of default growth pattern, this number was closer to 40,000 new units out there. By looking at recent development trends and a greater emphasis on centers and quarters, that number comes down. East Portland is still a huge geographic area in the city, and it is today. You know, it's 56,000 households out there today. So, you know, in terms of relative scale and size, you know, I would say the north and northeast and west are not growing their proportional share as it is today, but you know, we're still expecting to see a lot of growth in southeast and a lot of growth out east. So I'm going to turn things over to Tyler to talk about some of the performance measures.
Thanks. That thing goes forward. So this is a list of the performance measures that we evaluated with the scenarios report. These are all come from the Portland plan. Just to go over briefly, complete neighborhoods, access to frequent transit, access to low-stress bike network, housing mix, housing affordability, risk of displacement, parks natural area access, tree canopy, watershed health, VMT, mode split, carbon, greenhouse gas emissions, and access to family wage jobs. And the legacy development pattern, as Tom said earlier, plays a huge role into how the proposed plan and the infrastructure investments in the CSP and the TSP score. And one of the interesting things when we evaluated this is when we looked at the original growth scenarios evaluation, we only saw 2 to 3% increases based on different land use scenarios. When we included the infrastructure investment in that, the connection between the land use and the infrastructure made big increases and big changes into the performance of how some of these look. So really, there's two strategies that we've learned throughout the growth scenarios process and the comp plan process. One is to support growth in the right places. That's growing households where we already have complete neighborhoods and mitigating the impact or lessening the impact on the natural environment, and creating more right places. And that's really investing to reduce disparities, which is going to be, I think, one of the most interesting findings from the revised growth scenarios report is how investing to reduce disparities has moved the needle further for us. Lesson number 2 is increasing transportation choices has multiple benefits beyond the transportation system. We see climate action plan goals, meeting our goals, or getting closer to our goals through transportation choices. This is the frequent transit access map. So what you're looking at here, the black lines, is the current frequent transit network. The purple is future frequent transit. And a lot of that has been identified through the East Side Service Enhancement Plan work that TriMet's doing. So we worked really closely with TriMet and with PBOT to identify likely fiscally constrained opportunities for frequent transit investment. Since then, there's been a little more in the North Central Service Enhancement Plan. There's been a couple more lines identified that we didn't include in here, one specifically on Cully. But what this has done has increased our performance from right now, we're at 47% of households have access to frequent transit. And in 2035, with these investments in the land use scenarios, we're looking at 61%. Our goal is 70, but that's a big increase. And that's a direct increase from our prioritization to reduce disparities through infrastructure investment. The next one is a low-stress bike network. This one you can see, again, the purple areas, expansion of the low-stress bike network in East Portland, a lot in North Portland, and then connecting some of the Northwest neighborhood greenways and separated facilities in the inner East Side neighborhoods, mostly north-south connections. And that's a big increase as well, a 19% increase over the existing performance. So the goal was 80% have access to the low-stress bike network. Again, that's physical separation and bike lanes, striped lanes, not just sharrows, and also neighborhood greenways. So that's a big thing. One thing here is that this is not implementation of the full bike master plan. This is the fiscally constrained list. So if we were serious about getting to our goal of 80%, it would be implementing the full bike master plan. Not only access is important, but also the quality of the facilities are important as well to get people to make that split or that mode shift. So lesson number 3, we need to create more centers in complete neighborhoods, especially in East and Southwest Portland. This is the complete neighborhoods map. The frequent transit and low-stress bike network were big inputs into the complete neighborhoods for transportation access. So we've seen an expansion of complete neighborhoods in areas that otherwise were not showing up before as the result of future investment in infrastructure. We've made some zone changes, some land use changes to bring non-conforming commercial uses into conformance, to expand access to services in East Portland for different neighborhoods. And so those sort of things contributed to this increase in complete neighborhoods. So we're existing right now, we're at 63%, and that bumped up by 10% to 73%, and our goal is 80%. So we've got a little bit ways to go, but we've made a lot of progress through the land use and infrastructure investments. And we did a little bit of transportation analysis to look at both the VMT reductions, mode split goals, and also to look at our transportation emission targets through the Climate Action Plan. The proposed comp plan with the infrastructure investments, we see a 3% decrease over total, or from 2010 to 2035 in total VMT. The big thing here is that it's a 27% per capita reduction. So in that same period, we're growing 123,000 households. We're actually seeing a reduction in daily VMT as we grow those households. But when you look at a per capita basis, it's a decrease of 27%. And this gets a little bit more to the transportation emissions part, a 60% reduction from 2010. Our goal is 80% by 2050, so we're actually pretty close to on target to meet that 80% reduction by 2050 if we make these infrastructure investments that we've identified in the CSP and the TSP.
And so I think we'll leave it there and open it to your questions and then public testimony. So we'll go from there.
Questions? We'll start. Don?
Yeah, Tom, I need a little explanation on the legacy landscape. You know, what do you mean by 2/3 of the households are on the ground already?
Well, if you think about most of our residential neighborhoods that are off our centers and corridors, we expect to largely remain the same, especially in terms of the net new number of units. And so all of those houses are still going to be here 25 years from now.
Okay.
And with most of the growth being focused on our corridors like Division or Hawthorne or Williams.
Which is the 1/3.
Which is the 1/3.
Great.
It's that incremental change. We still, have 56,000 units out in East Portland that are underserved by our infrastructure. And that's where we start to move that needle by putting in new parks and new transit lines and new bikeways.
Howard?
Just a quick question. I think it's implied, but the word equity didn't fall into the principles. And it is implied in all of them, but shouldn't the word be there in some way to be very indicative that that's exactly where we're focused? And I'm talking about communities of color and all kinds of things here that don't get mentioned. Certainly they're implied, but I think there needs to be a little more, focus on that to feel like it's really conforming to the Portland plan and to what we're trying to do here in balancing growth.
Yeah, and I think that's where it is implied as a sort of, as with the Portland plan, the overarching equity principle, and it shows up in a couple of different areas. One is the focus in the report. We didn't really highlight it tonight, but on affordable housing and the need, looking at the different income scales and our need to provide affordable housing and that challenge. But also, here in complete neighborhoods and looking at the additional infrastructure investment that's going to be needed out in East Portland or even in pockets of Southwest Portland to create, and the way we close that last 7% gap is not about where we grow or the density of growth, but it's filling in those gray areas on the map and making them purple is how we're going to move that needle, and that is really focused on equity and the areas that are currently underserved by our infrastructure.
I also did evaluate, actually 2 weeks ago I presented at the Governing for Racial Equity Conference up in Seattle and presented some of this information at a workshop that that we had. And prior to going into that workshop, I looked at the increases in performance for the communities of color geography identified in the housing opportunity maps that I think everybody's familiar with, and what the performance increases were for communities of color and the performance increases for non-communities of color. And it's a really telling picture about how our commitment to equity shows up in the results of our investment decisions, both from a land use perspective and the infrastructure perspective. I think it highlights an interesting challenge in that we're making these infrastructure investments, and we've got to now get ahead of ourselves saying, you know, we're making these investments, what are we going to do on the displacement prevention side to address those before they come? But for the most part, you know, the communities of color performance increased at twice the rate of non-communities of color as a result of our focus on equity here.
Is there a way we can get a hands-on presentation that you gave?
Sure, yeah.
Here's the key.
This is the slide right here. So these, I looked at the same performance measures that we just showed in the presentation here. And bike access, non-communities of color was about 18% and about 23% for communities of color. Complete neighborhoods, I think, is the most significant one. Performance increases was about 18% for non-communities of color, and communities of color was increased about 32%. It was really interesting to present this information to cities, our peer cities on the West Coast. This was something new, and it was great for me to be able to present that to them and say, you know, this is exactly what we're doing, this is why we're doing it.
Okay. Chris?
So in terms of closing the gap to the Portland Plan goals, I think the theme I'm hearing you say is that you know, making it the rest of the way is a matter of investment and not being able to see the resources that would get us there. We turn that around and say, are there any policy levers that we didn't push that we could to move this further?
Well, I think, you know, our assessment is that 80 to 85% of the growth is happening in the right places, in the right form, in the right way. And that other 20% is just the market and the individual market decisions. You can't control or push it everywhere because we're not spending the investment money for the most part. So I do think, and we've seen all along, especially with the TSP discussion and even regionally, they found a similar result with the climate smart communities, that it was about implementing our plans to get there and figuring out that infrastructure financing piece to be able to achieve those goals.
On the transportation side too, you know, the program investments that PBOT has identified for the TSP are not necessarily factored into this because they're not geographic specific. But once you have the neighborhood greenways and pedestrian improvements and, you know, other program investments that PBOT's making, we saw decreases in VMT and decreases in transportation emissions when we modeled them, but we just don't have them on a map. So once we're able to map those, I think that you'd see increased performance as well.
Mike?
Yeah, I've got a number of comments. I'll wait till after the testimony for it. But one point, I think it's interesting. This approach is very consistent with where Metro was 20 years ago with the Region 2040 planning process. And there was a lot of angst over more people coming to the region, and it was going to destroy neighborhoods, when in fact 75% of the residential development was not going to go into existing neighborhoods because they focused on similar things. So I think it's just interesting. What we're proposing is very consistent with that. And just finally, made a comment last time about density, the use of the term density. I think, you know, the complete neighborhoods approach to this, I think, is the way to communicate to folks, as opposed to just emphasizing the word density. Just is, again, it's a really red flag, and we're talking about building a better community. So, comment.
Teresa?
Complete neighborhood versus
So I have a question on the gentrification measurement chart. It's a little different than the other ones, and it doesn't seem to have a goal. Could you just kind of give me what's going on there?
Yeah, so that's one where what we really, there are some of these, some of the tree canopy and the watershed and the, trying to find it, where we are wanting to minimize development in gentrification risk areas as a way of, if new development is part of that pressure for displacement, what we wanted to look at is, were any of these scenarios sort of pushing more development into those areas that are at highest risk? And what we were finding is, especially with the proposed plan compared to the others, it's a little bit less. And so that it's sort of, we want to go the other direction. We don't have a goal to shoot for, but we want to minimize that impact. And so that's, not all of them, we have a bunch of different measures that go two different directions.
Karen. Yeah, Karen.
So as a follow-up, so there's a number of stages that.
Is your mic on?
Is it on?
Okay, thank you. So there's a number of stages that you can pinpoint different leading up to risk of displacement, and I don't know. I guess I'm just a little concerned that by backing off of investment, it would lead.
I don't think we're necessarily saying backing. Well, I'm not sure what you mean by backing off investment. All we're doing, this is more of a monitor and evaluate where we expect development to occur.
Okay.
So if you see, 23% of the households in the city are in these risk areas,
Mm-hmm.
and they're getting 20% of the growth. So we're not overly burdening these areas with a lot of new growth, but they are getting some growth. And so it's not out of proportion. It's still an issue. And I think what we said, and what we said all along with that bubble diagram in the comp plan and investing in two strategies is these growth areas are largely complete, but we still need to make incremental investments there, largely with affordable housing, and to fill in some of the service gaps, link up some bikeways and do all that to support that growth. So that it happens in a way that we want to continue and maintain livability, but that we still have, especially when it comes to infrastructure, the heavier lift out in East Portland in areas that are, underserved. So it's that balance.
And then also coupling it with those preventative or mitigative
Yes.
mitigating
Right.
activities.
Which is sort of that incremental investment.
Karen?
People will move there. You had a slide going back on the communities of color versus the non-communities of color. Would you put that one back up? And the only question I have is a question that my board constantly likes to ask me when I give data is, what's the baseline data? So as you look, for example, to complete neighborhoods, you have non-communities of color at about a 17% growth and communities of color at about 32. Well, if I'm looking at a 15 or 17% growth, but I'm already at a certain number, that isn't as substantive. And if my communities of color bar was already low, I want to know what the actual comparison is, because looking at this doesn't tell me what the comparison is. Does that make sense to you?
Yep. We can work that information up and get it out to you. Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm just looking at this
Right.
bigger and that's better.
Well, this shows we're closing the gap. It doesn't define how big the gap is.
I'd be very
Right.
Other comments, or we'll move on to public testimony? I think we'll do public testimony. Again, if you wish to testify, please fill out a testimony card, provide it to Julie. You will have 2 minutes to provide your testimony. Nolan Leinhart, Edward Hill, and Kat Guggenauer, please come up. Nolan, you want to get started?
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Nolan Leinhart, and I'm here today on behalf of 1,000 Friends of Oregon as their board president. While 1,000 Friends of Oregon is best known for protecting and strengthening Oregon's legacy of thoughtful and intentional land use planning, I'm proud that the organization is also providing leadership to ensure that the success of our plans is enjoyed by the widest possible range of Portlanders. This evening, you will hear testimony from a coalition of 22 community-based organizations that represent communities of color, renters, housing, equity, and public health advocates. The coalition was formed to respond to the need to address inequality and strengthen equity measures in the comprehensive plan. 1,000 Friends provides coordination and technical expertise in land use policy, process, and law to the coalition. The coalition is a multicultural, and it is led by communities of color. We come to you today to urge you to adopt a package of amendments that as a package provide a policy framework for Portland to develop and grow without displacement. For over 40 years, 1,000 Friends has been encouraging the efficient and equitable use of land and resources, understanding that compact, livable urban places go hand in hand with healthy rural economies, and both will make our communities more resilient. As the Urban Growth Report you'll be discussing tonight suggests, there are many challenges ahead, and one of the greatest challenges will be to respond to growing inequality in our city and in the metro region. Portland's world-renowned livability is the result of intentional plans and decisions that reflect shared values. The Portland Plan established equity as a core Portland value, and we are hopeful that this plan will translate that value into policy with intentional measures to ensure that those communities who feel the greatest pressures of rising costs of living can also see the benefits from great walkable streets, good schools, easily accessible neighborhood services, and reasonable commutes to family wage jobs. By including anti-displacement in our comprehensive plan, we would be the first city in the country to respond with the intention to help people thrive in place, even with those with less means to pay.
Good evening, Planning and Sustainability Commissioners and BPS staff. My name is Edward Hill. I'm the Executive Director of Groundwork Portland, and we're excited, thankful and excited and empowered to encourage you to fully adopt the carefully considered amendments which Chair Baugh and Commissioner Talmadge will present to you this evening. Thank you, PSC commissioners and BPS staff, for your continued professionalism and commitment to community by including anti-displacement policies in the comprehensive plan update and for the work on the growth scenario report. Your actions today can set solid foundations on the road to actively creating more equitable, livable, and sustainable Portland. Groundwork Portland's work is rooted in identifying unused and underutilized publicly and privately held lands, residential, commercial, vacant, or former industrial lands, to begin the task of converting long dormant spaces into active, vibrant, and community beneficial places. Without a place to be, without a stable and secure space to build skills, capacity, and community, many of the most vulnerable populations we talk about equity with will once again be left to fend for themselves. People lose faith in the leadership, people lose hope in a solution, people lose connection with this process, with the pathways to success. They lose an opportunity to create and participate in the future of the city. It is important that we reflect in detail and closely monitor our future growth as a city. Portland 25 years ago in 1990 was involved in moving towards a 20-year plan that mirrored many of the same basic tenets of economic development, social and infrastructure development that are alluded to in this current iteration of the growth scenario report. The impacts of the continued inequality and the lack of inclusion for equity mandates in the early 90s are now the headlines of today. Inequitable access to resources, historical displacement, gentrification, near total unaffordability for the working class, and a loss of land and home ownership, and the removal and replacement of people in historical spaces across ethnicity, culture, and language. It is the position of Groundwork Portland that we must collectively plan for inequity, knowing full well that the systemic and institutional transformation that is underway is a long way from being fully trusted.
Thank you.
Thank you. No.
Andre?
Yeah.
Just a brief pause. Nolan and his cohorts here are testifying on an item that probably relates to our comp plan update discussion. Is that correct? More so than the growth scenarios report?
Yes, but they're free to testify on anything they want.
Okay, great. Just wanted to confirm that.
Okay.
Thanks, Nolan.
Good evening, Planning and Sustainability Commissioners and BPS staff. I'm Kat Gogenauer. I'm a Public Health, Housing Equity, and Community Development Consultant. Sincerest gratitude to the BPS members for your collaborative, inclusive, and equitable approach to working with our diverse coalition to use this iteration of the comprehensive plan to assess, prioritize, and respond to the needs of our most vulnerable communities to rebuild and restore those communities. Together, we have a unique opportunity to embed our shared equity and human rights values in a long-range 20-year comprehensive and collaborative planning document dedicated to affirmatively furthering fair housing and building inclusive communities, and to serve as a guide and blueprint to create inclusive, equitable, and complete neighborhoods for all Portlanders, new and established. Looking through an equity lens, we have an opportunity to approach this new generation of development asking development for whom and equity for whom. Fair housing, one of the goals is to reduce segregation. According to our analysis of impediments for fair housing choice, there are census blocks in Multnomah County where people of color are concentrated, defined as over 51% of the population. But no communities in Multnomah County are exclusively segregated, except for areas that are primarily white. In Multnomah County, higher income areas are also areas of low diversity. So as we approach this growth scenario, in planning for changing demographics of the region, we must remember that we also have the obligation and opportunity to uplift those who have been left behind as the economy moves from recession to recovery. One piece of the Fair Housing Law and affirmatively furthering fair housing says, although the grantee's AFFH obligation arises in connection with the receipt of federal funding, its AFFH obligation is not restricted to the design and operation of HUD-funded programs at the state or local level. The AFFH obligation extends to all housing and housing-related activities in the grantee's jurisdictional area, whether publicly or privately funded.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Quick question before you go. Do your statistics and information match the cities in terms of the progress we're making, but the steps we need to take to continue?
To me?
Well, yours, all.
The state of Black Oregon is one of, the most up-to-date accounts. The State of Housing Report by PHB, the homelessness point-in-time report. The data is here, right? And we have Coalition for Communities of Color data as well from 2010. We haven't moved the needle quite far enough yet.
Other questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next three are John Gibbon, Pat Wagner, James Peterson. John, you want to get started?
Yeah, to answer Chris's question, I would say that I tend to be one of those people that think medium-density housing is probably a better, more livable environment than the market has unfortunately reflected. And if I had a couple of items on my wish list of techniques you'd use to enhance medium-density housing, I would, one, make...
John?
I will get to it.
We want to start your testimony.
Okay. I'm John Gibbon, Sweeney Land. I'd say for a center city-based situation, remember the center city. I'm not convinced that you're going to get the numbers out of it when you start rationalizing that infrastructure, so be careful on counting on the center city of too much. And for Southwest Portland, I'd say your centers are questionable, Hillsdale especially. Your corridors are
Thank you, John.
desired, but not necessarily going to produce good results in terms of watershed health.
Thank you.
Go.
Yeah.
My name is Pat Wagner, and I'm a resident of Linton and past chairman of the board of the Neighborhood Association. You all remember, some of you were here when, can you hear me? No?
A little closer.
Oh, sorry.
Pull the mic closer to you.
Yeah, okay. Should I start over?
Nope.
Okay, my name is Pat Wagner, and I'm a past chairperson of the Linton Neighborhood Association and a Linton resident. And I basically have come to you with a huge opportunity to do what Portland wants to do, and that's to increase density. In Linton right now, since we lost our land, we took our land use plan forward and lost it basically in 2006. But a lot has changed since then. First off, the mill site hasn't sold. It's been over how many years, and it still sits vacant. However, it's been purchased for salmon habitat restoration, which is very exciting. And next to it is, I would guess, about 4 acres on the riverside of Front Avenue that could be developed into some, if the dream of dreams could come true, and it can, maybe a tiny house community of metal workers that are connected to the new site that the Linton Community Center owns right on Front Avenue, right in the heart of that industrial area. It's between 100 and it takes up about it's big. It's like two city lots is what it is. And we're going to be bringing kids or middle school and teenagers in to build and do metal work, house building, that sort of thing in that site. And if we could get permission for a zoning change out of heavy industrial for that small area between the river and Front Avenue, we would be able to place some tiny houses there and have a tiny house community and really increase the density. Which I see smiles. I'm sorry, but it's a dream, and it could happen. It really could happen, and it would work. And we have a lot of dedicated people from the industries, from when we did our golf tournament, that are willing to work with these kids. And you remember the Working Waterfront Coalition, and they were so opposed. Things have changed a lot, and they haven't updated their website in 3 years, okay? So they're not.
Thank you.
I'm done?
Yeah.
Okay. Push it?
No, you're done.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Hope I made my point.
Yeah, I was not smiling because you didn't make a good point. We're very concerned about loss of any industrial land, so that's a huge conundrum. That's why I was smiling.
Yeah, I understand. Except it sat there for how many years? Yeah. And it's at the heart of Linton.
Okay. James?
Hi, I'm James Peterson. I'm land use chairman of the Neighborhood Association. They'd like to leave the record open to respond to testimony today. We're also requested some information from Joan Fredrickson, which we haven't seen yet, so we can send a letter in. I've submitted some testimony myself from a report that came from Metro. It shows that the 124,000 number that you're trying to reach is has some flawed expectations and assumptions. Their capture rate historically has been 62%. But in the gross scenario report, they decided to go to 72%, which is an 8.6% increase. Now, the city of Portland is planning for 60%, of the housing units inside the UGB. But the best that they've ever done, according to this report, is achieve 36%. That's a big difference. And on an average, in the last 16 years, according to this report, you've only been producing 2,700 housing units. There were 2 years, 2003 and 2014, that produced a little over 5,000 units. This is far from the 6,000 units you'd have to produce every year. If you run those numbers, reduce it from 72% to 62%, and then use 36%, the number would come out with 68,000 housing units, which is far different from 124,000. Right now, Clark County is producing almost an equal amount of housing units as the city of Portland. And 80% of respondents in a recent survey would prefer to live in detached single-family houses. If that's really true, they're going to move to Clark County. And the projections you got presented earlier today are all wet.
Thank you. Questions? Sarah Taylor, Greg Thiessen, Jan Wilson. Again, if anybody else wishes to testify, please provide a card to Julie. Sarah, you want to get started?
Okay. Hi, my name is Sarah Taylor. I have come to see you tonight from the small village of Linton, a place nestled between the Tualatin Mountains, Forest Park, Willamette River, and Sovies Island. For tens of thousands of years, humans recognized the value of this landscape with its confluence of two major rivers, rich wetlands, and wildlife as a perfect place for settlements. It was indeed the first European settlement in Portland. Linton's place in the area's natural and political history has slowly been eroded, as this once idyllic piece of bottomland has been transformed into highway, railroad, and industrial storage. We believe that Linton is poised to offer Portland a remarkable, refurbished riverfront community with access to natural areas, commercial zones for employment, and affordable housing. When I wander First Street in Linton, I can see that downtown Linton is not a working waterfront, and I would ask any of you to go for a walk with me and really see what's down there. The once busy piers are empty and cut off from the village. It is now a vast display of empty lots, deserted vehicles, and industrial storage. Nothing is dependent on a once vibrant waterfront. Our small hillside roads are clogged with people driving to work in St. Helens and Beaverton. A walk, ride, and bike culture to Swan Island and Portland is not possible. In a city that is begging for more small communities and affordable housing, I ask you to consider Linton. Dream with us as we work to transform the area from 107th Street to 112th into a historically and environmentally significant town center with opportunities for housing, employment, and recreation from St. Helens Road to the Willamette Greenway. Clear this greenway of industrial storage with few jobs and replace it with a model neighborhood. We made this request before, and I stand before you and ask you to think about it again.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good evening, Chair-bound Commissioners. Thank you for this final opportunity to speak on the Growth Scenarios Report and related comprehensive plan documents. Sorry, I'm Greg Tyson from the Port of Portland. I have 3 points to make tonight on the Growth Scenarios Report, the Economic Opportunity Analysis, and the Comprehensive Plan. You received already today detailed comments from the Port covering these documents, so I'll be brief. The Growth Scenarios Report defines performance measures in support of Portland Plan measures of success. The Growth Report actually lacks economic performance measures. We have proposed additional performance measures detailed in my earlier submittals. Please give them your consideration. Those would include measuring foreign direct investment, export growth, new business creation, Portland Harbor cargo volumes, and probably most importantly, job distribution and growth by wage and location. Second point, since 2010, we've submitted over 10 letters commenting on the comprehensive plan. We have very much appreciated the consideration you and BPS staff have given them. I comment this evening again on the forecast in the economic opportunity analysis. The low forecast for harbor land demand remains inconsistent with past and current growth trends. Using the low forecast will impede city efforts to attract new investment in the harbor and affect efforts to clean up and reinvest in brownfields. Finally, I will end on one of your favorite topics, and mine. The removal of Policy 6.41, annexation of West Hayden Island, severely restricts options, did y'all guess right? Severely restricts options for future market-oriented marine terminal development in the Portland Harbor. The port, the city, BPS staff have invested 7 years of working on annexation of West Hayden Island. The commission should provide some guidance on annexation of this key open space and marine terminal property in the comp plan. That guidance should be based on the action taken by City Council and yourselves. Thank you again, Commissioners, for the opportunity to address these comprehensive plan matters.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you again for allowing us to have a chance to comment on the revised growth scenarios. I'm Jan Wilson. I formerly practiced in land use, and I was involved with a lot of the communities in Portland, but I'm here today speaking on behalf of the people that live in my neighborhood, and I live in Southwest Portland, and I live in a very small house, well, not very small, by most standards, 1,200 to 1,300 square feet. That's the kind of house that a lot of us in Southwest Portland really treasure. We treasure it because we have a small house that's close in, that we can ride our bikes to work, that we can live the life that we want to live, that the growth scenarios says that it, like as with Linton, that it says that they want to encourage. And what's happening is, like communities of color, like communities everywhere in Portland, we're being gentrified. Our little houses are being torn down, and big, huge houses are being built with no increase in density. You still get one family. You just have one family in a 5,000 square foot house instead of one family in a 1,400 square foot house. And what happens when that happens in Southwest Portland is reflected in this growth scenarios report. You lose the tree canopy, and you lose the ability to handle all the stormwater that's coming off the Southwest Hills. It's huge. When I first moved in my neighborhood, I could not believe how much time people spend moving water from here to there to try and make sure things don't flood. It's constant. And the more that we increase the impervious surfaces in Southwest Portland, the worse it gets. So please find a way to keep that new development to the centers and corridors and out of the residential neighborhoods, because where it is right now in the residential neighborhoods, you're losing everything that this growth scenarios report says that you're trying to encourage. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug Klotz. Again, does anybody else wish to testify? If you wish to, please provide your card. Doug, go ahead.
Hi, Doug Klotz. I support the growth scenarios report. I think the proposed comprehensive plan obviously performs best on almost all the measures in the report. The transportation ones I looked at pretty closely: complete neighborhoods, frequent transit access, low-stress bike networks, VMT reduction. I should note that the low-stress bike networks depend on building out the Greenway network and other low-stress bike facilities, and sometimes there's political pushback on that, and the city has perhaps not had as aggressive a stance on that as they could in getting this built out. So we need to keep an eye on PBOT and make sure that these things actually get built to achieve these results. The housing choice chapter, among other things, described a different type of housing, which Chris talked about earlier, the middle density developments, fourplexes, sixplexes, duplexes, small apartments that right now are not being built. They used to be built all throughout single-family neighborhoods. Now they could only be built in the multi-family zones, and the multi-family zones make more sense to build larger apartments. So what we need is, my proposal anyway, the single-family zones should be modified to allow some of these things, at least in the areas that are now R25, like a block or two on either side of the corridors, up those to R2 or some other modification that allows that type of housing in proximity to the corridors, and allows the density to step down from the corridors into the single-family neighborhoods. And then, of course, we need to look at the multifamily zones, which are not performing well either. That's another study that I hear that we're getting a grant for. But in general, I support the proposed plan and as reported in the growth scenarios report.
Thank you. David Red Thunder.
Hi. I just came here to listen. I got you guys' scenario in the mail, but as Greg spoke, we've had 80,000 cubic yards of toxic waste, or let's say river spoils, dumped in there. It was going to be a terminal, and then in 2013, January 8th, they pulled it off the agenda. And so right now, I guess Kate Brown, our governor, has signed a bill that it doesn't have to go through DEQ for this dumping of river spoils. And this is not really a scenario, but our rivers are like 6 feet low, below level, and ships have to have a 43-foot channel to come through. And already they had some meeting out at Sovi's Island last Thursday about the dumping of these river spoils. And we have to have a beneficial use. So we have 2,600 people on this island, and this ambient dust, we already been suffering this stuff already. And I'm not saying that we can tell from what's in the air, but we need to have a beneficial use, or we need to have at least the port to recognize that people do live on this island. And so anyways, I'd like to say that it's disturbing that the port does push this upon our island. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to testify? Anybody else that wishes to testify? Go ahead and have a seat. Well, tell us your name and we'll get started.
I'm Nancy Davis, and I live in the Cully neighborhood, and I'm here to testify in support of the anti-displacement policies.
Pull it.
Strong opinions, soft voice. Don't ask me how that happened. I'm Nancy Davis. I live in the Cully neighborhood, and I'm here to testify in support of the anti-displacement policies that have been proposed, the 11 policy recommendations developed by the 22-member coalition. In the last year, I've done work with Coley Boulevard Alliance, with the Jade District, with projects in Concordia, Woodlawn, and I'm deeply concerned with what I see on the east side, especially west of 82nd, but further out as well. That's pushing folks out. I think it's very important that we put policies in place that support wise growth, that supports and allows for neighborhoods with all incomes and all family compositions. Thank you.
Thank you. Last call for anybody that wishes to testify on the growth scenarios report. If not, the hearing, public testimony part of the hearing is closed. Tom? Questions? Mike? Don, you want to start?
There was a request by James Peterson to have the record left open. Does that come into play here in this process? What?
We don't.
We're not mandated to.
Right. No.
Okay. Thank you.
I think if you left it open, you could vote your recommendation out on July 9th at your next meeting when you do everything else.
Well, I close Is there a desire to leave it open? Okay. Questions on the growth scenarios report?
Some comments and questions.
Comments and questions, okay.
Just looking over my comments, trying to whittle them down. Yeah, just a comment with regard to Metro's 2040 growth concept. There's a lot of reference in terms of development, but not with respect to one of the most significant things for the first time in the region that Metro did, which was remove 200 feet on both sides of all streams, steep slopes, wetlands, and so forth from the buildable lands inventory. And I think it's important to note that because continually people argue that, well, we cannot do a better job of protecting streams because we're going to lose land from the buildable lands inventory when it's already been taken out at the regional scale. And that actually Title III, Title 13, and the floodplain management and so forth, Fish and Wildlife Habitat regulations were predicated on that. So I just think it's important to note that as well as the other, development in corridors and centers.
Mike, question I have, just for clarity, 200 feet from all streams and rivers.
On both sides.
On both sides. We already have developed inside the 200 feet.
We do.
So how does that relate to the inventory?
And we will continue to. And the point being that Metro recognized that development should be directed away from those areas. Now, the adoption.
How do you run a boat up to a business on a river? Does it?
I'm not pointing out the development pattern on the ground. I'm pointing out the fact that those were not considered in the buildable lands inventory.
Well, for inventory purposes.
Yes.
Great. Okay.
And we incorporated that. I mean, the reference isn't in the growth scenarios report, but it is in the buildable land inventory that informed the growth distribution model. I mean, it's sort of 2 steps back is where that shows up.
Right.
And it determines where the buildable land inventory and the capacity is that we then use to figure out where the growth might go. So it's a couple steps ago.
No, I realize
task
that.
2 is where that shows up.
Okay, I realize that, but all I'm saying is you reference the other aspects of the 2040 plan, growth management strategy, and I'm just saying it's good to carry those sorts of things forward so people who may not have read 3 steps back get it. The other point is the City Council just adopted BES's watershed scorecard, and in terms of measurement of progress on healthy watersheds, I think it'd be good to reference that in the growth scenarios. The other thing is there seems to be an inconsistency with the use of the term green space and natural area, and I just think it would be helpful if it were just consistent. And I think I'll leave it that for now, because a lot of them are recommendations, and I'm hopeful that we can, as we have with other issues, have a conversation about whether these are significant controversial items or not. I don't know that I want to go through all of them right now. Everybody has a copy of them.
Well, some comments. I'm very happy with the progress we've made towards the Portland Plan goals, the way we've integrated the scenarios and produced a lot more progress than any one scenario generates on its own. I want to put a bookmark here that when we do our transmittal letter to council, we should really highlight the investment issues, that the next movement in those indicators is going to come out of investment, not out of policy, and we should make that clear to council. And I guess I'll just opine that there's probably one more policy area where we didn't go, which is I suspect we could drive the indicators further towards some of our goals if we introduce more pricing in our transportation system. But I don't know if there's the particular enthusiasm to go down that route at this moment in time, but point out that is another tool available to us.
You're fine. go first.
Pretty quick. Oops, there. What's our response to the port's assertion that we're calculating growth potential on waterfront industrial on the low end? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, so that gets back to the EOA and sort of the balance we were looking at between available capacity and how we designate West Hayden Island and sort of matching the two, and that if we're going to leave West Hayden Island as it is and not sort of move that designation forward, then how do you achieve a higher level of cargo forecast without the capacity of West Hayden Island? And we think it's a very difficult case to make in terms of more intensive use of the existing terminals and the investment in the freight infrastructure system to push that medium forecast scenario through those existing terminals and the little bits of land capacity that we have in the Portland Harbor, without looking at or without saying that medium forecast really needs West Hayden Island to be realized.
So we can't elevate our forecast if we don't have land that we could put the facilities on.
That's what we're trying to bring in balance.
So we're kind of saying, hey, Hayden Island's off the table. So we have to lower our expectations on the growth of that industry, the economic benefit of that industry, and the job growth. That all goes down?
Not the job growth.
Why not the job growth?
Because we have the ability within our, because the way we set up the EOA was there was jobs was one part of the formula and cargo throughput was the other one. And there, because of the low density of jobs on the port marine terminal facilities where that throughput is going.
So you've got to elevate job density in other facilities.
Right, and that's achievable.
That's the strategy?
It's achievable. It's the throughput of the cargo that we have problems foreseeing the ability to really ramp up that redevelopment reinvestment. We're seeing some of it, and in fact the examples that they give of that reinvestment, like Dreyfus, is all infill on existing terminals. It's not new terminals.
Right.
We just don't think, in looking at all of the studies that was done for the West Hayden Island process, that you can actually achieve that level of investment that would create the capacity to accommodate that medium range forecast.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, so question. I thought that the argument with the EOA was there wasn't enough land to do a rail loop if you didn't have West Hayden Island. So that took out whatever needs a rail loop. But that we were making a policy decision, because I was in favor of the mid-level, that the choice was, if we're willing to take on policies that will invest more heavily to support the more intense development, then we could go with the mid-level forecast. So it's not that we made that.
We could. It's just a higher bar to sort of prove it, achieve it, and to commit the investment in the freight infrastructure and make that policy commitment to achieve that is a much higher bar. And the discussion here was, all things considered, to recommend the low forecast.
Right. Just wanted to be clear that there was a debate on that.
Yes.
Maggie.
Oh, yeah. So in regard to the Linton neighborhood, am I on? Okay. In regard to the Linton neighborhood, it sounds like there's a bit of a tension between having a complete neighborhood and then having the industrial area. Can you explain how that would factor into the growth report and how you would?
Well, it factors more into the EOA than the growth scenarios report, and that's been sort of one of the challenges here. It was highlighted also in the port's testimony, is that when it comes to sort of the jobs, the growth scenarios are really about a growth pattern and what choices we have to influence that pattern. And when it comes to the employment side, our employment areas are fixed on the ground. And the EOA really got into the what sectors do we want to grow, and you know, how much into our industrial areas versus the office sector versus the neighborhoods and the institutions. And so the EOA is where we explored those alternatives and what we could achieve with the capacity of our land use pattern. The growth scenarios really sort of took that as a fixed point, except for the neighborhood business districts. And we had those types of jobs follow the residential growth based on the theory that more residents, more disposable income, more demand for services in close proximity to where they live. And so that's what really changed among all these scenarios. And so the policy question and the map questions at Linton really get back to the EOA and the scarcity of waterfront industrial, and in many cases, the Portland Harbor Superfund shadow that has made it difficult to redevelop and reinvest until that is resolved. That sort of is that backlog. And so we have in Chapter 6 the policies about taking a leadership role on brownfields and the Portland Harbor Superfund cleanup. And, you know, basically what we've said when we look at the working harbor is that that is a more critical policy goal factor than looking at the growth of Linton as a complete community and how we do that in that little pocket.
Right, I'll refresh my colleague's memory that several months ago, we had the discussion about whether Linton should be a neighborhood center or not. And you know, if you remember from our bubble chart of which centers get investment for growth and which centers get investment to reduce disparities and which kind of remain static. And you know, Linton did not get in any of the investment quadrants, and I expressed deep regret because I know decades of my friends in Linton trying to achieve their dream of a complete community, and the fact that it really doesn't fit our parameters. So we hashed that one out, and sadly,
Its time may come. Its
I
time
hope
may
so.
come.
Other
Things are catching up with the reality of Linton. It's time may come.
Teresa?
So overall, really good work. I guess I just want to clarify a point, and I think I understand, which is we have a goal, and we have what we think our policies can achieve, and there's a gap. So that gap needs to come from market activity, and we also just need to make sure that we remind people that just because we did this, this is not enough. We still need some innovation, and we need some things to get us to reach our goal and perhaps exceed it. Is that?
We either need innovation, private investment, or additional sources of public investment to fulfill our infrastructure plan. So as Tyler pointed out, we have a bike master plan. The TSP and the list of significant projects does not fully implement that bike master plan given the constrained financial resources. So to fully implement is going to require additional investment.
Karen?
Yeah. I guess I have a question, but I'll lead in, just kind of listening to, through a filter of growth in East Portland and thinking about the 40+% K-12 students in the city that live there and the 25% of all people that live there. And in looking at your documentation around not only Central City being the biggest area of growth, but also East Portland and Southeast Portland, I'm hoping that we are really planning that we're going to invest commensurately in those places that are going to be seeing the most growth. So when you put Central City, East Portland, and Southeast Portland in the same sentence, I understand how important it is to develop your Central City. I get that. But there is a commensurate kind of equitable investment in infrastructure of all sorts that I'm really hoping this comprehensive plan is going to address. So when you're connecting the growth scenario planning with the economic opportunities analysis, there also has to be some kind of investment in job growth in the eastern part of our city. Every morning, I go opposite the traffic, and I see what's going into the city, and many of our families are getting on a bus, getting in some kind of car or whatever to get to their work downtown. And I'm really, really hoping that the city is recognizing the need for jobs in our area so our people don't get displaced out of where they're living. So I was really impressed with the first three speakers. They were really talking about the anti-displacement, anti-gentrification tools. And I do see that as part of this growth scenarios conversation. A lot of people in where I work are talking about how important those tools are, and we have amendments that people have worked on. So that's a lot of editorializing, I realize, but I'm trying to put this together in my head because I'm speaking to the East Portland Action Plan tomorrow night, and I want to talk about streetcar investment. And I want to talk about the tools for anti-displacement with the East Portland Action Plan, because we have an agenda there in order to support ourselves and keep our work moving forward. So how are you connecting? Just give me one example. I'm not asking for a lot. One example of how you are connecting these pieces of work.
So I'll give you two examples. One is the map changes. The map changes that we have in Gateway and on 82nd Avenue to take parts of Gateway that were designated for EX and make that mixed employment, to sort of lessen the sort of mixed use vision and make more of an employment vision, especially in Gateway and along 82nd and some of those parts up. You know, we had a conversation about Rossi Farm on 122nd and the Kmart site and all that. The other is, as Tyler showed on the transit access map, the frequent transit service plan for 122nd and 148th and 162nd that show up in TriMet service enhancement plans that are all designed to provide better access up to the Columbia corridor and into the airport, and to access those employment, that job centers that are up there. So it is both increasing the jobs in East Portland itself and increasing access to where our studies show a lot of people are trying to get up to, that live in East Portland, are trying to get to the Columbia corridor. That's where they're working. And so by planning the investment for increased transit service to make that an easier connection. Got anything else?
Is the city planning on a formative assessment of how well we're doing before the next 25 years of the comp plan?
Yes.
So you know what I mean? We don't want to wait 25 more years to see if any of this worked. So I'm hoping that we're making ourselves accountable to this work.
And I think that's where the Portland plan established measures of success, and we've talked about with the EOA needing to do that with every business cycle, with every new jobs forecast, to look at how we're doing and follow those development trends to see where's the job growth occurring, where are we spending our infrastructure investment, and to monitor that a little bit closer.
I agree with Chris. It's about money now.
Mike?
Well, now folks have had an opportunity to weigh in. I'll just pick one of the other issues that I didn't raise earlier, and it's actually more, I guess, a consternation or surprise when I look at the performance measures with regard to natural area access. You've got a lot of great stuff in here with regard to weaving nature into the city, habitat enhancement of large parks, development of neighborhood greenways, transit connections. We know that there's a lot more trail development that's likely to happen. The Red Electric, for example, Red Electric line, when that goes in Southwest Portland, will be a huge boon to that access question. And so I'm just surprised to see under the proposed scenario that there's actually a loss of access to natural areas. And I think one important thing to keep in mind, and I realize the Esplanade's not within a half-mile distance, well, maybe actually of folks downtown. Carol Meyer Reed, who designed that, put, pretty minimal amount of habitat by way of willows and so on and so forth. But the reality is, even on the Esplanade, as heavily used as it is, you do have encounters with nature. And so I'm just surprised that given these options for improving performance, that we would wind up with a net loss of 1% access to natural areas. I get the rationale you gave with regard to where the focus of development is, but even with that, with all these other options, I hope being implemented, and I'd say the same thing for the tree canopy, actually.
Yeah,
both of those were shocking.
Yeah, one of the challenges with the natural area access.
Speaking to the mic.
Yeah, one of the challenges with the natural area access was that natural area acquisition, and I talked to Michelle Koenig North about this a lot when we were going through this, is that we just don't know what the programming for the natural area access is going to be. And the access actually is from like the park's access is from an access point. So when you go into a park, it's when you get off the street and you go into the park. For natural area access, for new acquisition, we have no idea what the planning and programming of that natural area is going to be. We don't know if there's going to be access or what sort of physical, spatial access component there is to that to evaluate.
Okay, so the reality is it's probably not going to be a loss. There's going to be I think, some significant gain.
Well, I think the other is, if you look at the map on page 76 of the report, what is your definition of a natural area? And I would say that we've been pretty stingy and pretty conservative. These are pretty big blobs there.
Right.
We have not defined encounters with willow bushes on trails as a natural area. And we have not mapped the performance of a neighborhood greenway as a quality natural. Even though we talk about weaving nature into the city, we in this report, we have not counted that. We could do a shadow analysis if you figured that all of the neighborhood greenways become these nice tree canopy areas and you see songbirds and everything else, and that's a nature experience, that number will go way up.
Yeah.
But I think it's what do you define as a quality natural area experience versus an encounter with a tree or a willow?
I get that, and I'm not even suggesting you change it necessarily, although just acknowledging that there are these other opportunities. And our big challenge really is we don't have any more big areas for the most part, although Riverview Natural Area at some point in the future, not right now, there's desire trails and there's illegal use in there right now, but more than likely there's going to be additional access within the next year to 5 years or whatever.
But again, not a lot of people live near there, and this measure is households with easy access to a natural area, and so it's proximity, and just by its nature, the developed city doesn't have a lot of nature left in it.
Okay, it just would be helpful to, in your options, just to maybe just actually explain that, to describe that, the difference in approach, because small can be beautiful and is, and our big challenge in urban design is how do we weave nature into the urban matrix that is actually potentially very significant from a biodiversity and habitat perspective. I appreciate your response. I agree with you with regard to differentiation between Forest Park, Oaks Bottom, Powell Butte, and the Esplanade.
Right.
Maggie.
There we go. In looking over tracking and program evaluation for the gentrification risk areas section of the report, I'm wondering, can you remind me again what the framework for equity does? It shows a guide to track neighborhood change in demographics as well as anticipating impacts of new policies and programs. Is there a reporting requirement? Is there in terms of annual reporting on these changes, any actionable requirements after?
I think there's two things. One is, we have this gentrification risk area analysis that we've done, and we're in the process of updating that. That was based on 2010 data. We have 2013 data available to sort of update and see what those trends are, and that's sort of separate from any specific policy or plan decision. And then I think we still need to figure out that when after the comp plan and we bring forward a new area plan or proposal or infrastructure investment like Powell Division, how we go about doing that analysis. And we're doing some of that as part of the Powell Division project to sort of figure out what is that level of analysis and how do we do it. And it's sort of like what we've experienced with health impact assessments, West Hayden Island had a huge one. And well, what level of effort do we do if we're just doing a little, neighborhood business district rezoning plan? And so we're going to have to figure that methodology out to come up with the right level of analysis depending on the scale of the investment or the planning change.
Yeah, I just want to ensure that we're not just having analysis for the sake of analysis. I know you're taking this and you're looking at further investment to mitigate these effects, but I guess I like to see that reiterated.
And I think that's
documents.
What is in some of the proposed amendments.
And then, yeah, that covers it. Thank you.
Are ADUs a significant part of the growth in the existing single-family neighborhoods?
We looked at recent trends and just forecast that it would be about 3,000 new ADUs. So what's that? 2.5% or 150 a year kind of thing. So they're in there. But when you look at, we have 12, 15 different housing types. They all are little bits and contributing, but we put them in there.
I just have one question. Greg brought up the question of measurement around prosperity, and he was talking about wages and the distribution of those wages. And we have the measurement, we have the one measurement. Does that measurement include that jobs and distribution of the jobs in terms of the measurement as we as we think about that? Does that incorporate what Greg is getting at, or is it a different measurement?
I think that reaches back to the Portland Plan measures of success, where those metrics that some of what Greg referred to are in there. This was a specific analysis of the residential allocations, and so that metric doesn't really fit into our evaluation of alternative residential growth distribution. The access to jobs from a residential side was what we were measuring here. It's not including some of those additional economics related measures is not a sign that we're moving away from measuring those things as the comp plan goes forward, because we already have established those as our measures of success when we adopted the Portland Plan. This was a much more specific analysis that we were not measuring our economic growth with this report. That's not the tool.
Okay.
I think it shows the challenge of, and as Eric says, we're not moving away from those. A lot of those measures are better suited to monitor trends as we go along, as opposed to trying to forecast them out. And that's where, and even some of Mike's comments about some of the watershed health scorecard stuff, the growth pattern has such an indirect effect on things like water temperature that is an important part of that scorecard that we just couldn't get our arms around that in this report. Okay. But that's not to say that when we come back and make a progress report that we can't report on changes to the scorecard or changes to wage levels and wage distribution when we're looking backwards to see what the trends are.
Okay. One last one.
Yeah, since Tom brought it up at the beginning, The Forest Heights development is a classic example of what not to do for watershed health. So we want a baseline to look at in terms of where we're headed, and I think we are headed in the right direction away from what occurred at Forest Heights. You're cutthroat trout trying to make it that watershed. You're not.
And I think that's what we tried to capture in this watershed health measure that's in the growth scenario, to look at, we were measuring where was the growth occurring, and is it in a sensitive part of town with tree canopy and drainages, or is it in an already developed part of town that has lots of impervious surfaces, and redevelopment will result in eco roofs and stormwater planters and a net benefit based on just implementation of the stormwater manual. Yeah, and that's what we were trying to, that little piece of the overall watershed health index is what we were trying to capture with this report.
Okay, so any last questions?
I have a process question.
Yes.
So if I understand, we're not adopting this report tonight. What reports do we have left to adopt before we're done here? Just so I know what's in the queue.
Well, you can.
We can adopt it.
You can adopt it tonight.
It says recommendation. I thought that's
Okay,
what
all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm wrong.
Yep, and I was preparing to vote.
Hold on.
Bad assumption on my part, but what's left, just so I know?
Yeah, you have several things teed up. The EOA, you've held a hearing on the economic opportunities analysis, and so that's waiting for a motion to adopt at some point. This report, and then you have the actual comp plan, which includes the policies, the maps, the TSP project lists, and then the CSP document as well. So that's the complete list.
But we can adopt this tonight, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So is there a motion to adopt this?
Well, I'm pleased to move this forward, especially because of the wide array of people and groups that came forward to support it. I think the most important thing we have to consider is citizen involvement deeply, not just just folks who show up all the time, but people who are deeply concerned. And I think this reflects a wide opinion of the community, and so I'm pleased to move it forward for council consideration.
A second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? Julie, vote.
Yes.
Aye.
Yes. Aye.
Yes.
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 Yes. Passes. Thank you. Good job.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is a comprehensive plan update. This is a work session.
Can we get water?
Break. You just have to run.
Time out.
Can we take a 5-minute break and then we'll get started?
He's feeling benevolent.
Idea. Actually,
The first
I
break.
would give it to
Never
Spencer.
been break.
It's his kind of
Yes, in a long time.
big
Right? In a long time.
Well, I suggest you turn that into a
Usually 5 to 4.
artist colony and repository. Working artist space to work, artist space to live. Not only cheap, but maybe on the side.
We're gonna get. We're gonna get started.
Yes, yes. If you can visualize the first floor.
We're gonna get started and resume the Planning Sustainability Commission meeting.
Face out to the guard. Just beautiful. We'll see.
I'd like to see it, yeah. At least the plans too.
Susan. So this is the comprehensive plan update. It's a work session, and Eric or Joe, do you want to lead off?
Thank you, Chair Ba. Eric Engstrom with the Comprehensive Plan Group, and Joe Zender is with me. You should have an agenda for this portion of your work session in front of you that has, it's kind of an outline of the sequence, and it has a box at the top that talks about a process and tier 1, 2, and 3 decisions. So I'll give you all a minute to get that in front of you, so 'cause that's kind of key to our discussion guide tonight. Everyone see that?
This one.
Like this.
This guy?
Yes, Howard's got it.
We can share.
Okay. Is anyone missing one or not sharing one?
Looks like you.
Okay.
Like you lost the skating competition, Eric. Nobody held up any nines.
Okay. So just to back up and remind you what we're doing, we're in continued work session of the comprehensive plan. Thank you all for submitting all of your comments. If you recall, we issued a recommended draft that is this document last month, and asked you all to read it and submit a final round of comments for things you still wanted changed in that. We received a bundle of those last week, and you dispensed with some of those on the June 9th meeting, but it was kind of practice. We got a whole bunch of those this last week. We bundled them together into a packet, which was sent to you last night. And so this is the work session to begin working through that. Couple just logistical suggestions and requests. One note is in consultation with Gary this afternoon, we realized there's a small number of his amendments that didn't make it into this packet, so we'll be issuing an addendum tomorrow to just make sure all of those are on the table. So obviously we won't get to those today. There are 2 documents we released. One is a consent list, and the other is a more substantive list. The idea with the consent is that these are the amendments we got from you that as staff we thought there were either technicalities or fairly clear cut that we didn't feel they needed discussion. So that's one piece. And we called in the outline today, we called those tier 3 decisions. Essentially, you have that on the table, and we will eventually ask you to vote for that, but we felt like we could move forward with those as a consent list. The rest would be in this format of more detail. What we've described as tier 1 decisions are those where there was either staff disagreement with your amendment request, or that we got multiple conflicting amendments from you, or potentially multiple complementary amendments depending on your interpretation. But there was a clear pattern of what the focus was in all of your things, and we elevated those to this work session tonight to try and get through that top tier. And then that middle tier is everything else. Is that clear, just for terminology's sake, how we've done that? Okay, so we're gonna start up with the process we did last time, where we ask for a motion and a second, and then the discussion for these top tier ones.
Process question?
Yes.
So I'm not quite sure how this fits the matrix, but it seems to me that the map and project list decisions are a somewhat different character than the others, and I wonder if it'd be worth at least starting through those tonight.
If we can get through those tonight, we will. And that, I'm happy to take that idea. If we get through the rest of what we've said as the top priority, we could move on to that first. Chair Bod, do you want to describe the potential option for how we get to a vote on the 17th, on the 14th?
Potential option that we're talking about is for the tier 2 decisions. Those are kind of the rest of not were the tier ones, is that because we just got this today, I don't know if everybody, or yesterday, everybody had a chance to really review them all and digest them. But as you go through them between now and the July 14th work session, probably a week before, I would ask that you review them, and if there are items that you really have a disagreement with or you want more clarification, and you want to discuss that, you identify those to Julie. Otherwise, what I'd like to do is, if everyone essentially is in agreement with those, move those to the consent item list, and so that you have the consent agenda list would theoretically grow from items on the tier 2 decision list. And if people had concerns, they could just identify them to Julie. It would be pulled off, and we'd have a discussion of that list on the 14th.
So the purpose of this suggestion, process-wise, is that there's 50 to 70 items on that tier 2 list, and you're going to be here quite a long time if you talk about all of those. And so we're suggesting a further parsing of that middle tier to divide those into consent and things you want to talk about, essentially. And so
Just to be clear, because I think this is what you're saying, your last chance to do anything with this thing in the tier 2 area is the July 4th meeting with a recommendation coming.
July 14th, yes.
So get it in before. We've been told all along there'll be time, or you can weigh in and so forth. This regards July 14th, unless we change it, tier 2 decision and recommendation.
Well, the tier 2, unless someone said they have some kind of issue with it, would become on the consent list, and the first thing we would do on the 14th is vote on the consent list, and then we would discuss what is left of the tier 2. And hopefully that's a smaller list, and versus 50 or 75 items to go through, we could have one vote for a large majority. And consistently looking at the consent list, if you have issues you want to pull off, or you want to discuss with staff, you could work those out beforehand and get to so there's just a small list.
Yeah, maybe the simpler way to say it is from either the consent list or what's left that we don't talk about tonight, you can tell us what you want to talk about.
Yeah, and that's
then the rest we'll put on a consent list, if that makes sense.
I should probably also give fair warning that based on tonight's testimony and some of the other amendments, I may have a small handful of other amendments to propose before the 14th.
So what we're going to, you mentioned a deadline, and the 14th is a Tuesday, obviously, so we'd like those things before the 7th, which is a week before, to give us a little more time to get it out to you beforehand. And that would include either identification of what else you want to talk about and any new items from you, although we hope that isn't a large number because we could be here for a long time.
So in tier 1, where you said where there's commissioner disagreement, that means where 2 commissioners have proposed conflicting amendments to the same thing?
Yeah, and a good example that we hope to get to tonight is policy 9 or 6.39, where we have 4 of you trying to amend it at once, and so we've tried to pull it together into one thing and talk about it all at once. And so it's the industrial land policy, so it's appropriate that you've all zeroed in on it. So does that make sense?
I got a question from
Mike. No, I think this makes total sense. I'm just curious, how do we find out? You're going to tell us what's tier 1 tonight.
Tier 1 is what's on this, agenda list tonight. So if you look down below the introduction, we're going to start with the anti-displacement bundles.
Got it.
And there's a group in the room to watch us do that. We have an environmental justice amendment. The one I just mentioned, 6.39, there's a couple amendments around that. There's an amendment around tribal communities and governments, and then there's a TSP amendment. Those seem to be the most substantive and things that needed to be discussed. And there are other things that you're going to want to discuss on the rest of that list, but we didn't prejudge what that was. We just knew these were the obvious ones.
Well, and then you say below it what the next steps are.
Right.
Well, we just outlined the next steps.
I know that.
And I realized I just changed the date on you. I said in this memo July 3rd, and
Got it.
I just said 7th, so 7th is fine.
Well, we just saw this. So.
Okay, yeah.
I
you
get
just-
it.
Gary?
No, I think I'm okay. I just wanted to clarify that when we're talking about the everything else, it's the everything else that commissioners have submitted as proposed amendments, right?
Yeah, including an addendum to capture the ones we missed from you.
So to start,
More? He has more.
to start, before we get started, are there any proposed amendments in any of the lists, Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3, that commissioners would like to take, remove?
Well, you mean withdraw?
Withdraw.
That's an optimistic
No.
question.
I would like to remove one, number 74. 74.
As in putting it on the consent list, you mean?
It's
Just get rid of
on, it's on the.
As in not do it.
Tier 2. To not do it, I'd like to withdraw number 74.
74.
It's not on this list.
Where is it?
Yeah, it's in their big packet.
I'm sorry, Andre, which
Pardon?
item were you talking about?
Number 74.
74?
What's the topic?
And I have this on the screen, by the way, if you need to.
Oh, it's ESCO.
So 74 is the ESCO map.
ESCO
amendment.
map.
Okay. Well,
So I'd like to remove that.
that'll save me some time opposing it. Thank you.
Due to the kind of process and community concerns, I think it's good that we.
That's the first of the, or the third of the map requests.
Yeah. Any others that people would like to withdraw? Nope. Okay, let's get started.
Okay, so the first bundle is related to the anti-displacement request. We've grouped these into some subheadings. All of these came about, obviously initiated by the coalition that is represented in the room today.
And can the record reflect they look quite fetching in pink?
They are? I thought you were at a Timbers game.
So as we've said in previous meetings with you, we've met with this group a number of times to work through some of their recommendations, discuss with our different attorneys some of the options, and then really focused in on their review of this document here. And a couple of commissioners were willing to sponsor essentially the outcome of that discussion, and so Commissioner Chair Baugh, Talmadge, and Gray agreed that they wanted to be sponsors to that outcome. The last meeting with this group was about a week ago, Friday. Staff met with them to go over their more detailed edits, and we gave input in terms of what would work and what wouldn't work from our perspective. And then I believe the group then met with a couple of the commissioners after meeting with us, and that led to the bundle of amendments that we got. So that's sort of the history of how we got here. The first grouping was Amendment 8 and 9, which are a little bit related, so I'll turn first to 8. And staff has a kind of a joint response to this. And both of these were in the introduction portion of the plan. And this particular one, hopefully you've noticed the way we bundled these is that in each case, in addition to numbering them, we said who the amendment was from, what page you can find it in the document. And on your guide here, you also have the page number in both the amendment package as well as if you have your whole plan here and you want to open up to that page, we also listed the page there too. So the first one is page 4 of 21 in this document, and it's pages 2 and 3 of the amendment packet. And before I go into anything more, do one of the sponsors want to make the motion that we?
I'd like to move that we adopt. It's item 8.
And so, just from a staff note.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. From a staff note, we saw 8 and 9 combined, so you don't need to make another motion yet, but I wanted to just say that they relate to each other, and our staff recommendation on what you do with this is found at the end of 9. Essentially, both the amendment request 8 and 9 deal with editing and adding to the guiding principles at the beginning of the plan. And the 2 amendments you got, one was to edit the equity principle and the other was to add a new principle. Staff believes that you should combine those 2 into one change, one amendment of the equity principle, and that's printed in response to number 9. So I just want to get that on the table. And then
Discussion? Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, I have no problem supporting this. I'll just restate what I've said in the past, and that is, and I realize this is parallel or consistent with the Portland plan with regard to focusing on communities of color and underserved communities, but class, low-income communities are, you know, in the same situation. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Chris?
It isn't all related to.
So to get at the staff concern, I guess I would ask the sponsors to talk about what they mean by the phrase remedy in the proposal.
I mean, looking from a social justice perspective, at least, trying to work that in there, it would be remedying the past harms, whether that's through future investment, future land use decisions. So that's why we proposed remedy.
And how is that different from reduced disparities, which is a phrase we've used in a lot of places in the plan? How is that different from reduced disparities, which is a phrase we use in a lot of other places in the plan?
Mm-hmm. Reduce existing disparities.
If I can address that, it seems to me remedy in this context is relative to, if you look at the staff's suggestion, and really is talking about, when we talk about the injustices that have happened kind of historically, is to how do you do through policy, how do you do through the evaluation of projects and housing, building of housing. Remedy comes into effect when you say, I want to, remedy means that there's some kind of past impact to me. And anti-displacement is a forward-looking discussion, and remedy takes into account a historical discussion that gets to the anti-displacement as you look forward as a tool to provide a historical perspective of why would you want to do anti-displacement, and it is part of a discussion of a historical past.
So I think there'd be some concern that remedy would mean intent to make people whole for the past disparity. Is that actually what we're trying to do? Or?
So in terms of whether or not we want to use the word remedy, you know, I get that staff has concern and hear what you're talking about. One possible word would be address, so that you're responding at some level, but you're not suggesting it's making people whole. In terms of the staff concern about you not being able to do this in terms of exactions, I don't read anything in here that says you're going to do it through exactions, so I don't have that concern.
Other comments?
Well, I just think remedy is a more aggressive term. When you look at a plan, it suggests action, motivation, one way or the other. And to Chris's point, it may in fact indeed do some remedying of a neighborhood, but it does take into account aggressive action. I think it's a good term.
Yeah.
So, kind of following up on Chris's point, though, when I first read it, I was doing exactly, it's repairing things in the past. And so who's responsible for that? And so is it the person who comes in to make a land use change, or the people in the past who maybe created the injustice in the first place. And so I think that's where it kind of sets up a conversation that's a lot more deep and maybe or maybe not intentional. So personally, I feel more comfortable with address because you're not necessarily trying to change or make equal what injustice happened in the past, but we're trying to do better moving forward. Unless you're really going to try to point to the people in the past who started the injustice in the first place and have them work actively to remedy the situation.
I think we're looking at the past policies that have been made. So remedying those policies, ensuring that they don't occur again towards the future. I don't think it's not holding someone accountable in a court of law necessarily at this point, like a specific individual. But I see where you're going with that in terms.
Remedy, from my perspective, suggests that it's completely resolved. Whereas I think, Chris, the word you used, you're working towards a solution. Remedy to me means you've completed it. It's completely solved. That's my perception.
Well, the intention is all the same, I believe. It's saying the right words.
I think the intention is the same. The concern, and I guess I'll express the concern, is that this policy, and this is really equity is one of the 5, or how you look at this, maybe 6 if you include inclusion, is a policy of the comp plan. I mean, that's one of the 5 principles that people will read. And we ought to be very clear about our intention of what we're saying and how we're saying it, because I believe equity it's a key, it's a cornerstone. We're saying it's a cornerstone. We've said it's a cornerstone throughout the Portland plan and now in the comp plan. And my concern, and I expressed this to the group too, is that, it has to be doable. And the concern you raised on is remedy, if they think it's done, can we do it? And maybe, 10 years from now, someone may say, I really can't do that. And that's just someone reading the policy, I can't do that. And so I know there may be consternation, but it to me is, I want to make sure that it's very clear from someone 10 years that picks this up and has to look at a comp plan and make a decision and have a Catherine in front of them or a Dawn about what does this mean, or a Michelle that comes up and says, I don't see the definition.
We need a glossary entry.
The glossary is not there. That they are, we've been clear about what we want, 10 years prior, the intent. And so from my standpoint, I'm willing to look at kind of the staff recommendation of equity and the change of address, a remedy to maybe address that becomes more of a, because you're really, it's intent here, and I want to be as positive as we can, but I want it as doable as we can, because if people pick it up and it's still doable and there's still room to grow and they still think it's a stretch, then it will get done. If it's beyond their sight, my sense is it's not going to be there. That's just. Yes.
That's an argument for address over
remedy. It's an argument for address over remedy, yes.
Maybe we should go with address.
Someone should make a
motion. I'm just making a suggestion.
Our ground rules were we didn't amend these, we withdrew them and proposed new language, right?
Yes. So.
All right.
So I'm going to withdraw. Well, we've got a second, so we have to
do something with it.
Yeah.
You have a second.
We have a second. So we can amend the.
This could die and then you can go.
Yeah, then we can come back and redo it. Yes. Catherine?
So I guess part of just how we're going to do about this, what if we have other things that we'd like to talk about within this
Yes.
before we
Go ahead.
Is
Go
now
ahead.
the time?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to kind of piggyback on the communities of color piece, and part of it is I had a very enjoyable car ride listening to a long discussion from City Club about transgender populations and the injustices that they've gone through. And so I guess I'm almost wondering is, should it be broader than just communities of color? And so I'm throwing that out there. And then I, kind of back to the same, almost the same, that's a little bit different than the word remedy, but I was going to say prevent. And I guess if I knew we really, I'm throwing out maybe avoid, and that prevents a pretty tough bar potentially. And so, and if it's achievable, I guess that's part of the discussion I want to have. Then and if we all feel comfortable it's achievable, then I think I can be talked into that. But if it's not really achievable, then maybe avoid needs to be considered. I'll leave it at that.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah. Gary, let me have Gary go first. Go ahead.
Yeah, to the folks who drafted this, can you give an example of what remedy would, could you give me an example as to what remedy would look like in a decision process? Because I'm struggling a bit with the term. I mean, I know what it means, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure how that would play out through a land use decision process.
Well, I don't know about a land use decision process, but I could see the city having some sort of policy where they designate funds for helping people return to a neighborhood where they were previously.
Yeah. City stepping up.
And I think that was
Be
a
quiet.
core principle of that remedy was getting at a right to return, because there have been specifically communities of color, more so than a lot of underserved and underrepresented communities, have experienced displacement and gentrification through direct city policy and both direct city planning. So the idea is to, for remedy would be, leave that door open for right to return and policies that could put communities back together and could allow communities to thrive again. And no longer be disconnected from North Portland to East Portland. And again, specifically communities of color, because if we look at, just by example, the Black or Native community in North Portland, policies against Japanese Americans, or, the list goes on. Land rights and treaty rights for Native Americans. The land goes on. So specifically, there have been targeted policies against communities of color. Not aware of specific, in terms of housing, so specific targeted policies, which is why I included communities of color. I think there was a third point.
Mike.
So yeah, not to rebut myself, but I did point out, I think the rationale for focusing on communities of color is that it is consistent with decisions that have been made in the past, starting with the Portland plan into the comp plan. So even though I feel personally that it's not all related to race and ethnicity, there are other issues in terms of low-income communities. The fact of the matter is, we did adopt that policy, and so my response would be, I think this is being consistent with the Portland plan and the conversations we've all had about equity as a lens.
I'm going to take on the word prevent, because I had problems with that word, and a lot of discussions with, not a lot, but a good discussion with the community groups on it. And as I looked at the word, we use prevent throughout the plan in a lot of places. I have a problem, huh? No, we do use prevent staff was able to kind of go through. We use, and I'm just going to pick on policy 7.12, invasive species. It says prevent the spread of invasive species. The word prevent, if we tackle it here, and I have in a later policy asked them to change the word prevent because I had problems with it. But if we start picking out prevent here, it's a Pandora's box to me. You start looking at, well, what's the difference between that and preventing the spread of invasive species? Because my argument to the community groups was, could you prevent means you will not allow anti-displacement. And so is that realistic? Is that realistic? Will that not happen in the next 25 years? And I personally just don't believe we will put enough money, resources, effort to do that. We can avoid it. We can certainly mitigate it. We can certainly do a lot of things, but I don't know that we can prevent it, and especially in accordance with the definition that is in our glossary. But at the same time, if you look at this anti-displacement and you look at prevent use throughout the comp plan, we certainly want to prevent invasive species, transportation, accidents. We want to prevent a lot of things. So I'm conflicted because in this decision, in its specific context, I'm concerned, but in other contexts, it may be certainly appropriate. So in this context, I feel that it's appropriate. Later on, I asked them to make a change because I didn't think it was appropriate, and they used a different term. Yes?
That's been done already?
That's been done in a later section.
In an amendment.
No, it's an amendment.
Oh, okay. We're going to discuss that.
Yes.
All right.
So there's a proposed amendment to the definition of prevent that's more consistent with what you're talking about. So going from don't allow at all, stop from happening, prohibit, to proactively avoid or hinder adverse impacts or outcomes, which I think we can certainly do in this anti-displacement. We can proactively work to avoid it.
In fact, that's what I changed we changed it to proactively avoid.
I guess as a point of principle, in terms of repeating injustices, I don't think there's a way that I can't personally justify just avoiding injustices. I can't avoid, there have been, if we're looking about redlining or access to home ownership or just land use decisions, those are decisions that we absolutely cannot allow. We cannot allow past policies to repeat themselves that have, really pulled apart communities.
Catherine.
But Maggie, excuse me.
I'm going to get Catherine and Howard. Go ahead.
I don't disagree with your point, but I think sometimes we inadvertently make policies and we do the best that we can trying to not to, and unfortunately it happens anyway, and we learn from it and then we correct it. And I guess that's more what I'm thinking of with, you can try your best to prevent it sometimes and it still happens. And I kind of agree with your whole point. It is semantics. I'm struggling as well, so I'm open to the discussion. I'm not that hung up on it. I do think you could prevent invasive species. Yeah. So I really don't have an issue with that one. But and perhaps we need to look at
maybe it's a different one,
all
but
kinds
there's
of places.
Andre,
get a better one.
Andre, before we keep going, I think we might have a staff clarification that might help the discussion.
Well, I just wanted to remind you all of language which actually Commissioner Rudd asked to put in a second place in the plan to further emphasize it. But on page A3 of the plan, we added that language, which was in an earlier work session, that it basically says even the strongest policies do not automatically trump other policies. Every decision is different with different facts. The particular policies, that matter more, will change from one decision to another. There's no set formula. No particular number of heavy policies equals a larger set of lighter policies. So we wrote into the plan to remind you that although the verbs are important, there's not a magic verb that automatically trumps everything else. So even if it says prevent, you still have to make findings against the whole suite of plans of policies in the plan. And there are going to be circumstances where you choose one policy over another because of the facts of that situation. So this is policy that gets weighed against each other. It's not that every policy is always met every time with every decision. That's just context for how you debate this.
And if I could just add, when you look at this, one of the ways I was always examining these changes to the guiding principles is how might we use it? Because the guiding principles are a new thing, a new element to the comprehensive plan. And at one point, I think this draft of this principle was talking about preventing displacement or something like that. That could have been an earlier draft. And that sparked the same kind of reaction that Commissioner Baugh, in me, the same kind of reaction Commissioner Baugh said. Not because displacement's good, but when you think about how we might use this, trying to separate what's a repetition of an injustice, which is what it says now, from housing prices going up, could prove really almost impossible for the Commission in the application of this principle. What Eric read says we've given ourselves the ability to reason it through, and that's part of what these principles are, is to make us think multi-objectively and to be as transparent with our thinking as possible. So it may not be that critical, but I guess what Maggie just said about preventing repetition of an injustice, that's, in that framing of this, it's a little hard to argue with. Preventing displacement, I think we're kidding ourselves. So that's what I think it would be hard for this Commission to do.
One other staff thought in terms of our concern was that thinking back through, remember this is about land use decisions because it's a comprehensive plan. So we were trying to think of situations where you'd have to make findings against this. And there are a lot of, we can't think of all the different future plans that may be out there, but one could imagine making a land use amendment that was to add a park or add an amenity to a neighborhood and running into this and saying, I can't remedy past injustices, so therefore I can't move forward with this amenity, adding this to this neighborhood. And so our staff concern was that we were putting a bar on future improvements that we may not be able to meet.
So, I'm
sorry.
Go ahead.
So to clarify, so you're saying that in tandem, saying recognize, remedy, and prevent, that's sequential. So if you can't remedy, then you can't avoid going forward or prevent going forward. Is that what you were just trying to say? Like that's the concern, that you could get hung up on a land use decision or planning.
Yeah, if somebody is facing a land use decision to make a change in a neighborhood through a neighborhood plan or something, this appears to put the burden on them to remedy past decisions, whether or not they caused that. And so that may stop changes in certain areas, and some of those changes that they may be seeking might be positive changes. So our concern was that you can't necessarily draw a line back to the past injustice. That's tricky.
So, there's a motion on the table. It's been seconded. I'm okay.
Can you remind us what that motion is?
The motion is for pass amendments 8 and 9.
Yes. It was just 8.
We haven't talked about 9.
Huh?
Just 8 is on the table.
Just 8. Just remedy 8. So, do we?
Can't you withdraw your motion?
Well.
Yeah, can I suggest for the sake of expediency that we allow that a motion be withdrawn if both the maker and the seconder agree to withdraw it? Yes. Without having to vote on it?
And discuss it further.
Well, and then we'll talk
Get a
about
new
the
motion.
new motion.
Yeah.
I'm willing to withdraw the motion.
Yep. I'll pull mine back.
Howard. So the motion's withdrawn. So I would, part of the staff recommendation is to combine 8 and 9 into one equity. And in that discussion that we just had, the issue, I'm actually okay with prevent, given the discussion that Eric had, but the word remedy still I wrestle with. And the issue of underserved, I think Mike addresses low income from my standpoint. I think it.
Yeah, I'm cool.
It does.
I'm ready to
So
vote.
We talked about changing remedy to address.
address, yeah. So I'm willing to.
Why don't we just vote?
I'm willing to propose that we adopt 8 and 9 as a staff recommendation with a change to remedy to address.
Second.
But are we
8
talking
and
about,
9.
are we talking about combining them yet?
We're,
That's the next.
we're talking about combining 8 and 9 into an equity.
With this word,
Yeah.
remedy, removed.
Just for clarity,
Remedy is replaced by the word
address.
address.
He's putting it up on the screen.
He's putting it up
He's
on
trying
the-
valiantly.
He's trying, but he keeps
And I
forgetting.
keep spelling it wrong.
but just to clarify Commissioner Talmadge's question, yeah, that whole discussion of whether or not to combine hasn't taken place yet.
So,
Well, Andre's moving it.
no, I'm,
It was, okay.
it was moved and seconded. So the motion on the table is combine 8 and 9 and to change equity
Remedy to address.
remedy to address per the staff recommendation. So the only principle would be in the anti-displacement would be equity, and it would read as on the screen today.
That's the motion.
That's the motion, and it's seconded.
Okay.
There's discussion.
Discussion. Gary?
Question. So will there then be new language that comes back to us for consideration at one of the July meetings for final approval?
No.
No, we're passing it now.
No. If we vote
voted
yes,
yes.
okay, this is the language.
We're done.
Maggie?
So I guess my understanding was the Anti-Displacement Coalition came to staff and had a conversation about an explicit standalone anti-displacement policy, which resulted in this inclusion part. So I'm just confused where that got lost along the way and if that was relayed to.
We've expressed concern about the additional principle in the discussion as well. So, you know, that was why we came down with that recommendation. We did meet with the group and make suggestions about how to word the requested amendment as best we could, but we also prefer that it be one principle.
Would it be useful to maintain that inclusion component?
Well, doesn't intentionally engage
Yeah.
accomplish that?
Okay.
Other discussions? Howard?
Well, I think it was, I was really moved by the introduction of alternative lifestyles as not being represented here necessarily by communities of color. As you want to look ahead to the future and try to gauge what's going to happen, there are emerging underrepresented or in some way that are not quite covered by the word communities, which I make a plural and make a very broad, comprehensive view of, that are not quite covered in the injustice of the thing. Can we or should we look at that? Because it's, I'm just provoked by the fact it's not there and it's glaring. It's absolutely emerging in our culture.
In the recommendations on the screen, it says intentionally engage underserved and underrepresented populations. I don't know if underrepresented captures the LBGT. Yeah.
Shall we not be thinking about
policy
underrepresented?
Well, I'm just saying we say underserved and underrepresented populations twice.
Yeah. Okay. But then you get the debate, do we say people with disabilities?
I was just going to say.
So for some clarification,
Yeah.
you'll go back in time to 2012, some of you, and we had this discussion several times in the adoption of the Portland Plan.
Yeah.
And we came in with significant data around the impacts on communities of color specifically. It doesn't mean that disabled women, a long list of other communities are not affected also adversely. It just came out that in the Portland plan, we chose to focus on communities of color.
Yep.
Like Mike said.
Like Mike said. We're going to do what Mike said. Other comments, questions?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
so again, in the equity component, so are you saying the socioeconomic opportunities is just going to reflect, are you saying that's including the minority-owned and small businesses? So the new proposed improving socioeconomic opportunities under equity, you're hoping that'll
Yes.
encapsulate the minority-owned and small businesses adequately? Okay.
Remember, this is the sort of the big picture guiding principle, and there are a number of more specific policies about that get into each of those elements. So I don't think that's disappearing from the plan.
And if you look at the definition of underserved and underrepresented, just as Commissioner Baugh was saying, it's a big, broad definition that is inclusive and actually would capture those groups, since in this particular statement of inclusion, it's just about making sure those voices are heard.
any other final comments? Maggie?
No.
No? If not, Julie, vote?
Yes.
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 Yes. Next is 16.
Wow.
Sorry, I wasn't pushing my mic. Number 16 is on pages 12 and 13 of the amendment package. And this is a collection of related amendments to the introduction, or actually the goals of the public involvement chapter, chapter 2. And so there are sub-policy or sub-goals in the larger set. So it's amendments to B through, I think B through E or F. And the staff, the document we sent you has the rationale broken down for each of those.
Is there a motion? Maggie?
I motion to accept.
No.
Oh.
You want to
Move the
make a motion?
Yeah.
Huh? Okay. Is there a second?
Sure, I'll second.
To adopt 16. Discussion?
Good stuff.
Good. Call the question?
Any discussion? No. Julie, vote?
Yes.
You went to the bathroom.
Yes.
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 Yes. Number 21.
So 21 was in policy 3.3 in the urban design chapter. It's pages 20 to 21 on your amendment package. And once again, this policy is a multi-part policy, so similar to the last one, we bundled it all together. It's changes to 3.3A all the way through F, I believe, or sorry, E. And the E is an additional sub-policy that was proposed as part of the amendment, which is around coordination. And then the rationale is broken out for each of those. Staff just notes that the additional statement in B, in our opinion, was a little bit duplicative of other policies, but we didn't have significant objection. It just, it appeared to us to cover material that was already covered in some of the other section.
I don't have the.
Move that we adopt Amendment 21.
Second.
Who's the second?
22, you mean?
No, 21.
21 is.
I got 22.
Oh.
Is it 22?
Yeah, pages 20,
I'm looking at 22. What, am I
Is
looking
it
at
Hold
the
on,
wrong
let
thing?
me-
Your amendment, Talmadge Graybaugh?
Yeah, it's 21.
Oh, but-
It's actually what
20.
Eric just presented was 22, and there's another amendment 21 that.
So this one's
We're on
22.
22,
Putting on
for better or worse.
Wait a minute, so what is it? Okay,
Oh, I,
was wrong, the amendment is correct.
Correct. Right.
Okay,
it
so
should
it's
say
20,
22.
Right.
Okay,
okay, sorry.
so it should say 22.
Yeah.
Got it.
I still second it.
Let's look at 22.
Okay. Discussion?
Did you make the motion, Andre?
Yes.
Yep.
Can you do that as chair? Just tonight only?
Done many times before.
Sure. We've got a motion.
Okay.
Oh, I thought you were
No, you make the motion.
Well, I'm going to withdraw the motion, and Mike, you want
I'm
to?
not withdrawing my second.
Huh?
Yes.
Yes,
Fine.
okay.
I move,
Okay,
Oh, you
is
gotta-
there another motion for
Order.
item number 22?
yes.
Yes.
I move that we approve Amendment 22.
Second. Yeah.
Second, okay.
We have to do
Okay,
it that way.
discussion.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes. Items 30, 35, 36, and 37?
Pages by,
35 to 38.
35. Bear with me for just a second. I'm getting my scrolling legs here. Okay, so yeah, this is items 35, 36, and 37. We should probably go in order. So 35 is on page 35, coincidentally, of the packet. And it's related to policy 5.9. It's adding affirmatively further fair housing to that policy to be clear.
the others are,
Do we want to get a?
Is there a motion?
I'm happy to do them as a group if you want me to describe each
Is there a
one.
motion for 35?
I
36,
move that
and
we
37?
approve Amendment 35.
Go back.
Just 35? Is there a second?
Second.
Well, let's just do 35.
35.
Okay. Discussion on 35? No? Julie?
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Item 36.
So 36 is policy 5.11, and there are a couple things to note here. One is that there's a 36A, which was a parallel. I don't think that this is a competing amendment. It just happens to be a different amendment to the same policy, so you might need to combine these. The two amendments were just dealing with this slightly differently. The first is introducing a number of new phrases, and then the second amendment was just ending, sorry, I just went too fast. The second one was from Commissioner Schultz, and I believe the theme here was that many of your amendments where it said evaluate, you added a clause to say what to do with the evaluation. So I think the 36, the earlier 36 also adds that concept. So I don't know if you want us to focus on the first one and.
I'm fine with focusing on the first one.
Okay.
So 36A is off the table?
Well, I haven't made a motion, but
No,
we can
the-
focus on the first one.
No, because I want to understand, you're kind of taking it out of line.
We're,
Just delaying doing the first one.
Oh,
do the first one
yeah,
first.
okay.
Yeah.
So is there a motion on the table?
36. Yeah, I move 36.
Second.
Second. Discussion?
From a staff point of view, I would just say that the words significant new infrastructure and new development is duplicative of the phrase plans and investments because of the definition of that. We believe you're saying the same thing twice there, but
And where is that definition?
that's in the glossary. The plans and investments includes anything on the list of significant projects and the TSP, which would include any significant new infrastructure.
So I guess I'd ask the sponsors whether they intend to include private investment or if they're just talking about public investment.
Well, plans covers private investment because through plans you regulate private investment. So the word plans and investments is a phrase we use repeatedly because we didn't want to keep listing out zoning amendments and infrastructure projects and land use decisions. And so any land use decision about private investment is included in plans and investments because of the definition.
So I guess I have a bias towards being concise, so I'd rather not see the duplicative term unless somebody can make a case it adds value.
Well, and it almost seems like the definition is more broad than
Insignificant.
the amendment was stated,
Yeah.
but it also seemed to support plans and investment personally.
Gary?
Just a question on the definition of protected classes. Which authority are we relying on there? I mean, is it federal civil rights or ADA or?
I think you should ask the sponsors of the amendment.
I think the protected classes are the federal definition.
I'm getting tripped up on this, how significant new development is included in the plans and investments. So say I have this huge 10-acre development that needs a conditional use permit. I'm not amending any plan. How does that get treated here? You're saying it's still part of plans and investments?
It's changes to it's changes to zoning maps or zoning regulations. So at any point, when we make a zoning change to enable a development.
Okay, so you're saying if it's not a zone change, it's not significant new development?
No, I'm saying you don't, as a matter of code, the only time you're making findings on the comprehensive plan is in a zone change. When you're doing a conditional use, you don't actually ever make findings on the comp plan. So this policy would never be read.
Question then. My question would be then to the writers, why was it added? Was it added as a point of clarification? Maybe we don't understand what plans and investments are, it's too broad. Maybe this is giving it more. I mean, I'm all for concise language when it works, but is this helping where you guys were going with this, that significant new infrastructure and significant new development was particular to what you were trying to say here? Regardless of what the glossary says.
Do you want to give it a shot and I'll follow you?
I'm actually okay with removing significant in terms of if it adds more clarity and it lines up, and it actually may open up, I mean, it may be a broader application of plans and investments.
Okay. I had a trouble with significant too, but I think their intent was to capture developments when quote-unquote significant transportation projects or developments in terms of public investment were occurring, and that you take into account the anti-displacement and all the policies and everything to just make sure that those occurred at the time when, again, under significant. So I'm okay removing it. No, I'm.
You may have had a reason.
No, I was actually against the word significant, and.
I'm talking about the whole thing, Andre. I'm
The whole
talking
thing?
about all 7 words.
Oh, okay.
So, all right, so if you want to drop significant, you want to put evaluate plans and investments such as new infrastructure and development. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to get at that, if that's something you think makes this clearer.
I think the words evaluate plans and investments is pretty clear to me because that includes everything. I mean, it seems to, if I'm looking at it, it includes everything that would be covered under the comp plan. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the plans of investments phrase that we use throughout the comp plan is focused on helping us clarify that these policies, that's when we use them in that context of a comp plan related decision. And so the major new infrastructure, the comp plan part of that is the list of projects. So when we do that part and actually put it on the list of the TSP or the other list of projects to be implemented, this opens the door for us to ask, what's our expectations for the housing impacts and how is that built into the scope for the project? And that's practically the only time we see those projects for an official decision. We often see them just to keep track of what development is in the city, but that's the point where the commission actually has authority and leverage over those decisions. And significant new development, I believe, is captured in the legislative parts of this. So that's is just tightening it up for how we've used it. It's not, it may not reach as far as the original authors intended, but it's more accurate for how we would use this policy in the comprehensive plan, and it, you know, gets at the same type of projects and same type of potential impacts.
An example on the significant development is the debate you had about the OMSI housing decision. That's, you made a zoning decision there that would be captured by this policy. If you meant an individual building permit, that isn't necessarily going to be captured by this because we don't make comprehensive plan findings on individual building permits. So,
But if you were doing the zoning code amendment, text amendment process, is it possible that this would be considered at the point you're looking at criteria?
yeah, if you're doing a code amendment that would create the potential for significant development, or then you the plans and investments will capture that piece.
Mike, you had a comment?
No. I'm just remembering a conversation we had.
One quick question.
Yes.
We've also, and I may be a little off on this, but we've talked about 11 anti-displacement tools, and we've spoken very specifically about these tools. We have 35, 36, and 37 here. What part in 35, 36, or 37 are the tools mentioned?
So are you asking for a crossover between the 11 recommendations and the various amendments, including some of the ones that you've already approved?
Right, and so what I'm asking is, have we already addressed the tools not in Tier 1 amendments?
The 11 have outcomes that are sprinkled throughout some of your amendments.
Yes.
So you've,
But
some
there's
of
no mention of 11 tools in
they
one.
don't map one-to-one because a couple of those concepts in the list of 11 are manifest in several amendments here. So we
So
could make
anybody-
a crosswalk for you, but
And what I'm saying, that's very important to me as a commissioner and the people that have talked to me. And so I think that we're a lot of smart people in the room that get this kind of thing, but when people want to look and be able to point to it, they like to be able to point to it. And so that's why I'm just trying to make, for my own understanding, I don't sit and study this maybe as much as other people, but I want to be able to see where the tools are. And so a crosswalk for me or an appendix something is really important to me. So that anybody looking through this can say, yep, chip, that's where the tools are, so we can use them. Otherwise, I can't find them.
So we can have that for the next, we'll get that out to you in the interim. In the meantime, I'd suggest we go through these, vote on them.
Okay,
And
we need to keep moving.
We can
So,
include on that list what you've already adopted.
There's an amendment 36 on the table.
Yep. Yep.
What are we going to do about the language?
What are you going to do about the language?
So long as if removing significant, we can be broad in its application. We can include a lot of these development and infrastructure projects that have a significant impact on displacement risk. I'm okay removing significant.
Okay. So the second, please, does the second want to withdraw?
Yes.
Okay. You want to repropose the motion with 36 with the significant removed language?
Just significant.
Well,
So you want to remove the whole phrase?
Oh, the whole
or you
phrase, you
just-
keep saying significant, but that's
But
not.
it's the whole phrase, right?
Is it this phrase that you're?
Is it all 7 words, or just the word significant?
I'm asking Maggie.
Well,
So I support removing significant if it's, the whole thing, and you're proposing plans and investments.
Staff's advice was that plans and investments captures it.
Can I borrow
Okay.
this?
The difference being that it depends what you mean by significant development. If you meant an individual building permit, then it would be considered captured. If you meant a large-scale rezoning effort that creates the new development potential, then it would capture.
So I think just for the entrance of clarity and transparency, I'm going to read what plans and investments, the definition that's in the draft plan. So plans and investment are legislatively adopted land use plans, so big zoning maps, zoning regulations, comprehensive plan map designations, the transportation system plan and the transportation projects that are in it, and changes to the list of significant projects. The phrase planning and investment decisions is also used to mean decisions about plan and investments as defined here. So those, we use, I guess, a different phrase elsewhere in the comprehensive plan, but it's those legislative actions, those capital system actions, both transportation and significant projects.
Maggie?
After that definition, I'm going to keep significant new infrastructure and significant new development. If it doesn't pass, it doesn't pass.
Okay, is there a second? So the amendment as proposed.
Yes.
Is there a second? Howard? There's a second. Discussion? Nope. Julie? Vote?
yes.
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 No. No.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. 36B.
Andre,
Yes.
Got that definition wrong first.
it was hard for me to vote yes for that because of the redundancy. But I voted yes, just to kind of move it ahead, and I don't mind kind of reinforcing certain points, but I think there's some redundancy here.
Yeah.
Luckily, it's redundancy on good things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I really hear you on that, yeah.
I'll have to second that point, but I will withdraw 36A since I think it's now been covered by what just passed.
Okay. 37.
Thank you for that clarification.
So 37 is to policy 5.14, and that's on page GP 5.7 of the actual plan. We had the same note about the same phrase in this policy, so we don't need to repeat that discussion, but that was the staff's position there.
So on this one, I do think it's very duplicative, and we should remove all the 7 words, significant new infrastructure and significant new development for. Yeah,
And the concern I had, and the reason I voted no against the other one, was the duplication, so I would still take it out.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm supportive of the concepts here, but I'm in the same boat. I'm going to vote no, just because I think we're just continuing to duplicate things we don't need to duplicate.
is there a motion?
No, but I'd like to clarify one item
Yes.
if I could.
Yeah.
It starts out, evaluate plans and investments, things that are essentially have potential to increase housing costs. So would that include systems development charges?
Yeah.
Is that a plan? Evaluate plans?
It's not a land use decision, so technically you would not be making findings against the comp plan on an SDC. That's our understanding.
But typically SDCs are imposed as part of new developments that go through a land use process.
They are, but it's not a land use decision, at least according
It's
to our.
at building permit.
It's a legislative action by the city, but it's not a land use decision.
Okay.
Totally redundant. What?
So is there a motion
37?
for 37?
Are there more of these, or are we going to be redundant on just 2 or 3?
This is the last one of
This
this.
is the last one.
Let's get redundant. Let's vote it.
I move the approval of Amendment 37.
As,
Yes.
is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? So it's been moved and seconded, 37 as amended.
I have one discussion.
As amended.
It, huh?
As
Well, I mean, well, as shown.
As shown. Okay, thank you.
Catherine?
I suspect that part of the desire for these 7 words is exactly what you kind of keep trying to say, Eric, is that there's a desire to tie it more to building permits and actual project specifics that people are seeing happen more to, not
Which-
TSP and all that, transportation and major infrastructure is not, but like,
Which
that is a
isn't
broader thing,
right.
which is not what this is representing,
No.
and I think everybody needs to
Yeah.
understand that, and I'm not sure
And
everybody
that's
does.
part of staff's
why
perspective, is that
we're-
it's not legal for us to do
towards-
discretionary analysis on building permits
Yeah.
in that way. So we can't apply it that way.
Right.
Well, and there's a nagging concern that that is a subtext here, and that's an
Right.
understandable thing to want to do. And for us to put it in the comprehensive plan, unacknowledged that it doesn't really apply, or applies in a very limited way as it would in plans and investments, seems disingenuous to future generations that are going to see this and think one thing when the way it's going to be implemented is the other.
But the way it hits the rubber hits the road is when you're developing the zoning ordinance language. If you establish, this doesn't just automatically get a building permit, it has to be evaluated against these criteria. If you
Right.
draft those criteria so that this is incorporated, it does.
It could work its way over time, I think.
Right.
Right.
Michelle, I didn't hear the end of your last sentence. I'm sorry.
Just when we were going through the broad definition of plans and investments, and what I got out of that discussion was that when you are going into the zoning ordinance and you're proposing new language there, if you say in the multifamily district you can have this much density, but you have to show that, where's the language? That you have to show an evaluation of how you're responding to potential gentrification or displacement. It's possible to, as you go down the road, I mean, we're talking about where does the comprehensive plan, where does somebody actually pick up the plan and do something with it? So if somebody's drafting new zoning ordinance language, they will pick up the plan, go through the policies and say, okay, am I consistent with that? So if it's something where it's permitted as of right, you go get your little building permit and nobody ever compares it against the plan. But if you're at the point of, okay, I'm not just allowed as of right, I have to go to get land use review and they're going to hold me against these criteria, then this does get applied.
So for
Correct.
instance, if you're hoping that this language takes a 5,000 unit housing complex and makes sure it addresses this, it won't. not by this language, because by permit,
If
would come back to the comp plan.
Well, it depends if that 5,000
If
unit.
it's allowed by zone, well, okay, I'm kind of trying to say significant.
In the
because-
case of the OMSI example, it wasn't already allowed,
Allowed,
so a
but that
change was
changed.
required.
Yeah.
If it's, another example might be the high-rise in the Lloyd District on a block that's already zoned for a high-rise development. This wouldn't apply because it's already zoned for that, and there's not a, you don't have to look at the comp plan to get a permit.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, and just the other place, the other sort of example is for a significant new infrastructure project, and that would include BRT on Powell Division. That's already in the significant project list, is it not? Or in the TSP. So that, and it's when it was put in, that would be the point where this, for our decision here, this policy would apply.
Yeah.
So as I say, it's sort of, I don't want people to walk away with the misperception that all these projects that are already on that list will get another look at this. They will, but it won't be because of the comp plan, because we're committed to this as a city and more generally.
So I think the takeaway is that there's some additional work to be done in different areas that are below comp plan level review in order to actually make some difference, right? I mean, there's different areas to address this that are not at the comp plan level.
Commissioner Rudd was correct that really if we wanted this to apply at a case-by-case basis, we would have to write zoning code that evoked it. And, you know, in the extreme version, we could write code that required this analysis for all, you know, building permits. That isn't legal in Oregon, so we probably couldn't do that, but that's sort of the extreme version.
So, we have amendment on the table. Any more discussion? Julie?
Yes.
Yes.
No. No.
Yes.
Rudd? No.
Schultz? No.
Shapiro?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
St. Martin?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yes.
Paul?
No.
Did that carry?
It passed. All right. I was against.
We're getting down to legislative
Yeah.
manipulation.
All right. Number 19.
We're on 19.
So 19 is about an environmental justice policy. It's in chapter 2 and it's on page 16. So we're going backwards back up to chapter 2 in the packet. Bear with me while I scroll up. This was essentially a substitution. Sorry, am I on the wrong? I'm still not on the right page yet. One more. This was a substitute policy for the one that's in there. And if you want to see the original, it's page 2-8 in your larger plan.
So Maggie?
When Commissioner Oxman and I discussed this. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
That's why it's.
Sorry. I motion to adopt this amendment.
Second.
Okay. So as we looked at this, that the idea was, you brought it to my attention, actually. It was a bit convoluted. It was hard to read, and we were looking at just making it a little bit more readable. So that's the reason why it was proposed in a different manner.
So, go ahead, Chris.
I mean, simply put.
So this has an issue that I believe occurs in another amendment as well, which is basically replacing sovereign tribes with tribal communities. And the discussion in the other amendment is that tribal communities is intended to be more broad because it avoids the question of whether there's federal recognition for a given group. But Sovereign tribe seems to convey a lot of weight that tribal communities doesn't. So we're elevating one group and we're pulling down another group in sort of level of significance, and that concerns me a little bit.
So I'm, in terms of having both sovereign tribes, so including those that are federally recognized, but also including tribal communities that recognition along the way.
For ease of discussion, maybe it's possible to separate these and just admit
that would be great.
If whatever decision we make on that other amendment would also apply to this because it's plan-wide.
Howard?
Well, I'm not sure this fits, but we have now kind of pointed out beyond just communities of color, people with limited English proficiency and tribal communities, again, ignoring the LGBT community. Now, I'm not sure how that connects to the environmental issue, but I do know that that community is being excluded, and just surface it as a kind of an identity around looking to try to, I guess, articulate how communities and different things are going to evolve over time. I'm not suggesting an amendment, just a curiosity about you've called it out here with more than just communities of color. You've articulated communities that aren't just, as Chris said, you know, people with other kinds of needs.
So yeah, I'd like to hear from those who pulled this together. You know, again, why call out? Because you can also say those who are excessively challenged, ADA access and all that kind of stuff. So why calling out those particular ones versus saying underserved or underrepresented, and make it maybe a little bit more broad?
I mean, environmental justice is very specific around the governmental action. And, huh?
I picked a bad argument.
Yeah, and so I mean, I didn't pull this together, but I know when you look at environmental justice policies from the federal government, the city, and the state, it's very specific about who you look at and how you look at them.
So it's predefined?
It's predefined. And so it does not include LGBT. It's low-income and minority communities of color.
Well, this is in an introductory section, and it's just providing background. So I don't know that we push the boundaries on.
So I was directly drawing this from, a lot of this from, you know, the EPA definition of environmental justice, as well as the state definition established under the Environmental Justice Task Force for the state.
Yeah, for what it's worth, the policies below still use the term underserved or underrepresented group. So we are actually broadening it in our policy application.
Yeah.
Mike?
Well, I'm pleased to see low-income communities included. I do have a question about, are we saying, we say tribal communities, and that includes folks who are not part of a recognized tribe, and it says, and governments. Is that the term of art that we want to convey to recognized tribes? We have, the city of Portland passed a proclamation which focused on the city's relationship with the tribes, recognized tribes. Is this consistent with that?
I would say that in the spirit of being redundant in many places, and because this is the introduction to the policy, including sovereign tribes and tribal communities and governments, we have the opportunity to recognize the most communities and participants as possible so that no group feels like they were left out of this.
And
so I would add, if you want to do that, then you would add sovereign tribes and tribal communities. And some people might find that redundant, but others would find it appropriate given sovereign tribes has real meaning.
I think it's totally appropriate.
Gary?
A couple of comments. When Maggie and I were talking about this, the intent again was to broaden representation of Native American peoples or recognition of Native American peoples, and so I think the language got changed to tribal communities and governments. Governments being being conceptually similar to sovereign tribes. So I think if we can amend this to include the language sovereign tribes, that probably makes sense. Tribal communities and sovereign tribes, or sovereign tribes and tribal communities. The other thing that I'd point out is that this is an introductory set of language, and this is really to set a context for looking at environmental justice. It does not mandate anyone to do anything in particular other than to recognize these historical trends of disparate impact and non-participation. And so I just wanted to lay that out.
Chris?
So 2 points. The role of introductory language, my understanding is that when staff is making findings against the comp plan, they go to the introductory language to establish legislative intent if the policy language itself is not clear. Is that a correct understanding?
Yeah, you can treat those as kind of purpose statements for
Right.
the section of policies that
Right.
sit below it.
So-
And it's also just part of the narrative of the plan,
Right.
but it really is
Yeah.
that legislative.
So I'm not prepared to say it's just introductory language. I think it still has importance as such. And my other concern is the fact that I know the previous version of this had a lot of stakeholder buy-in. So I don't think this is bad, but it's different than what a set of stakeholders bought into. So I'm going to oppose the change in the hope that some work can be done between now and the 14th to reconcile the two versions and get us the best possible version of this introduction. So when I vote no, that's what I mean.
Staff's comment is, this may be fine, we just haven't
Right.
checked with all the stakeholders that were involved in the writing of the first version, so.
Chris, that would also leave some time to pick up the edits that Commissioner Oxman just mentioned. Yeah, I'm not opposed to this at all, but maybe it's better to defer until those corrections are made.
My concern is just conference with the groups that we got agreement before. So would it be possible that you remove the amendment and then withdraw the amendment today and then resubmit it back with your changes, and we have that conference with the communities?
Yeah, we've got threads already out
Okay.
to figure out whether we're okay with this.
So can you withdraw the amendment, and then we'll,
I withdraw the amendment.
and the second?
Yes.
Withdraws.
Whoever seconded.
Whoever seconded, withdraw it? Okay, and then you're going to withdraw the
Reluctantly.
amendment today, and we'll bring it back. Okay.
Okay.
Stop seconding.
So just a time check.
The time.
We're past our time, and but I would like to get through, and we'll see if this is possible. Schultz and Mike and Catherine get through theirs, and so we could get through the next six, which is 49, 50, 51, 42, 43, 44, 7, and 52. If we could get through those, are people willing to stay and see how we do?
And
then the tribal communities, I think we've already kind of been there, so that should be a good one. The TSP may be a broader discussion. We may have to throw that one.
So
So
Andre,
49?
on the 49, 50, and 51, because they're all amendments to the same policy, what staff did, and I can pass this out, is I put them all in one sheet to look at. And then there was a little bit of dialogue with between Commissioner Rudd and Hauk about C, which I've substituted the wording that you guys agreed to in C. So that's a little different than the wording that was in the packet, but that was an email exchange that happened earlier today. By way of intro, this is the prime industrial land retention policy, which has had a decent amount of discussion in your earlier work sessions as well. There's A through E sub-policies, and basically the discussion boils down to the word prohibit versus protect, and then some clarifying language from Commissioner Oxman, and then in C, the while ensuring impacts on environmental resources are also limited was a discussion that was had today. So I don't know if there's somebody willing to make the motion of the whole package. And then the unresolved issue is really probably the discussion is the protect versus prohibit language.
Is there a motion?
I move adoption of the language.
A second?
So just for clarity, this is 49, 50, and 51 together.
Yes. So,
Second.
discussion? They're all a package.
And so you're looking at the sheet I passed out, not on the screen this time because I don't have the screen version.
I'm just looking at these.
You don't have a sheet? We need another sheet.
We'll share.
We always do.
Okay, so for discussion purposes, I had suggested that we use protect rather than prohibit, and there were a couple of things behind that. One, we've defined protect broadly enough that it includes prohibit, so it's prohibit or limit. It also is trying to be more consistent with the other policies in 6.39 that have limit. What we seem to be doing is when the city wants to convert prime industrial land, it can do so, but if we say prohibit, that would lean against an individual property owner coming in and saying that I'd like to get my one property considered. I think I'm all for preserving prime industrial land. I think it would be next to impossible to make the findings you'd have to make to get prime industrial land changed. I think a standard, and you can tell me if this doesn't apply in the city of Portland, but normally when you're trying to get a comp plan map changed, you have to show that your change is more consistent or furthers the policies of the plan better than the existing designation. I think that would be hard to do, but you would still potentially have that possibility, I think,
So
with protect.
from a staff point of view, just to technical clarity here is that Section A applies to quasi-judicial comp plan amendments. So parallel to the comp plan policies, we are moving ahead with code language that would prohibit quasi-judicial comp plan amendments. So if I'm understanding your amendment correctly, you're saying don't do that.
I guess I would save the discussion for when we get the policy. I think that if you use protect, you still have the option to go a prohibit direction, but you could also come back with a policy that says, we've got these criteria for a quasi-judicial comp plan amendment of prime industrial land, and you have to show that you can replace it in kind. So say you own the Lytton property and you want to convert it, okay, go find us another 2 acres of prime industrial land somewhere. Now, you may well not be able to do that, but if you can, then we would consider it. So that's the underlying.
That's a good example.
No comment.
or build a bridge over the rail line, too.
So the B is what limits conversion through the other avenues. So the way we've worded it right now is before the amendment, you can't ask for it as an individual property owner, but if it's part of a larger plan, we have the ability to consider it. So that you know what this change would mean is that we would debate this again at the code level when we bring that forward.
Mike?
So yeah, I came in loaded for bear on this one, and regarding the word protect, again, but I went through chapter 7, and I was predicting that the word protect was not in there as much as I found it to be. And so I'm personally, maybe surprised to hear this, pretty comfortable with what's been proposed, using the word protect, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who will disagree with me, but that's okay.
A little disagreement's okay.
So we have an amendment on the table and a second.
I was trying to get something to eat.
Oh, you missed that?
Yeah.
You missed my...
So there's an amendment on the table. Other discussion?
Is there just one or all three?
No,
It's
all three.
It's all three, and it's all three per the
Take it or leave it.
passed out discussion,
Yeah,
correct?
So this is a little different than what's in your packet because we attempted to reconcile them.
Okay, so 49, 50, 51 is the amendment for the pass out. Any more discussion? Julie?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
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 Yes. 42,
See,
43,
that wasn't so bad.
44, and 52.
So these are actually individually considered. So the first one is on page 44 of the packet, so bear with me while I turn there.
44.
So this was in chapter 6, and this is in the introductory language, and the amendment is to add a bullet to the list on page 6-1, which is the introductory language for what this chapter is about, and this is the economics chapter.
I was hoping this was tier 2. Consent.
We kind of bundled all the economics chapter stuff into one
All right.
sort of, let's talk about it, because we knew that there's been a lot of discussion.
I move adoption of this language.
It's amendment 42, correct?
Correct.
Simply adding the language that you want.
Discussion? Nope. Julie, vote.
Yes.
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 Did he say no?
Yes.
Yes. Number 43. Mike? Is there a motion?
So 43 is on
Oh.
page, is on the next page in your packet, and it's page 6.6 in the plan, and it's goal 6, sorry, 6.6, it's goal 6C, about business district vitality, and it's elaborating on the quality of life elements in the plan.
I move adoption of the language.
Yeah.
Discussion?
Why is there a reference to Southwest Washington?
Because that's part of our region.
This is a Portland Comprehensive Plan.
Yeah, well, we have access to those landscapes.
Okay.
I,
Oh, so you're referring to not political boundaries, but physical
well, yeah.
geography.
Mhm.
Okay. Question.
Other
That was
discussion?
actually a very intentional, I mean, you're right, we only have jurisdiction in the city of Portland. Metro only has jurisdiction on the south side of the Columbia, but all of the conversations regarding landscapes, regarding the regional parks, trails, and natural area system is 3,000 square miles, which includes Clark County, and it just seems, to me, reasonable to acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I think you narrow it down more by saying kind of Southwest Washington, and that kind of tapers along the
Yeah.
Columbia River. That makes sense.
So the question I had on this one is Columbia Basin, does that take in Southwest Washington? I mean, I'm just, is it redundant?
Depends what part of Southwest Washington.
I'm just asking.
No.
Well, you know, no.
It's
I'm
calling out our region, and I think I left Columbia Basin in because it was in the original, and I didn't think it was.
And you're making a natural systems reference, and the Columbia Basin extends way east.
Yeah.
All those influence the floodplain calculations that we all do in our
Keep
own
in mind,
region.
this didn't start out as a natural system policy. This was a economic location policy. So the Columbia Basin was about trade.
Tugs.
So,
And my argument is that this contributes to the economy of the region.
no, I'm just saying, if the Columbia Basin is very expansive,
Yeah.
is Southwest Washington inclusive of the
Yes.
Columbia Basin?
Take it out if you want.
No,
I was wanting to be specific to all the work that we're doing to include Clark County, Washington, which we typically leave out, that's all. So I'm happy either way, frankly. if it's a redundancy problem, not that we haven't been redundant before. Multiple times.
Other discussion?
No, I want to be redundant one more time because I understand Mike's rationale. I do. And I think we should leave it in.
Other discussion? Nope. Julie?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
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 Yes. 44.
44 is
The next page.
I move that we approve Amendment 44.
Second.
Adding just the word creative.
Yeah, just to add a little bit, you'll see my amendments all kind of go along the, including the arts.
Other discussion? Julie?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
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 Yes. 52.
52.
Yep. Is there
Oh, is it?
an amendment?
So this was to policy 6.41, which is the natural resources damage assessment Superfund related policy. Staff note is that we don't support this amendment because we think it's redundant to other policies that are in Chapter 7, and you're duplicating those policies.
Is there an amendment?
I move to adopt this language.
A second? A second?
Thank you. I respectfully disagree with staff's assertion that it's redundant. I mean, I went through Chapter 7, I found no reference to Superfund, and all of the language relating to Superfund is about brownfields, redevelopment, and so on and so forth, and nothing about the opportunity to improve environmental conditions through NERDA.
The policy that we're referring to is 7.15.
7.15. Page. Yeah, it just says brownfield remediation.
But the policy says improve environmental quality and watershed health by promoting that incorporates ecological site design and resource enhancement. So it seems like the same policy to me.
Yeah. It's way different, in my opinion.
So I guess our advice then is that you should amend 7.15 because now we're creating a conflict between the two if they say different things.
There is no conflict. Superfund is intended to do both. Both encourage economic development and remediation for past damages, which is what NERD is all about.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is you're saying you have one version of how to improve environmental resources with NERDA in Chapter 6 and another version in 7. So that's
you're okay. You're
that's
talking about
confusing
7.
to us.
Yeah.
I don't know which version to listen to now.
Brownfield and Superfund remediation?
Well, my intent was just to point out that there's another function, another outcome from the Superfund process. And if we don't say that, then I would say no, I would not amend 7.1, whatever it is.
Rather than try to amend it on the fly right here, we can come back, and as the first thing when we come back, going through this, we'll have a new version of those two blended together. Does that work? And talk to you in the
I
interim.
withdraw my amendment in the hopes that we can figure this
Merge
one out.
those together.
Yeah, we think we don't disagree with your substance. It's just
I
how
get
do
it.
we put it in a way that doesn't create
I get it.
confusion.
Is the second withdrawn also?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. One more. Tribal Communities and Government Amendment 63.
63. There we go again. Pardon?
So before any motions are made, what I heard earlier was that you were considering modifying this to just include all of them, to say
All three.
something to the effect of tribal communities, sovereign tribes, and governments, or something to that effect.
Sovereign tribes and tribal communities.
Okay.
If you want, like, I mean, since we're addressing the other environmental justice policy, I'm fine bringing this back again as well, and just for
This one-
consistent. So, just discussing that with other stakeholders.
And this is a global change throughout the
Yeah,
plan. Is that the
so-
way this is worded?
Yeah.
We could also come back with a list of where this shows up in the plan, so you know where it applies.
Good idea.
Okay. So number 63 is withdrawn at this time and will be brought back.
Okay. There, that wasn't so bad.
So we will not tackle number 69 and 70 at this point, correct?
We'll defer those till the next.
Yeah.
Gratitude to PBOT staff who stuck around just in case.
Yeah. Well, let's do it right now.
It's triple time, isn't it? I get it, triple time.
So
I mean, you're
let's
annoying all the
let's
time.
go
You
through
guys, you
let's go through very quickly next steps,
Yeah.
timelines.
So July 14th is your next meeting. Tomorrow or the next day, you'll get an addendum from me to capture the missing items that Gary submitted that we missed. We will work with you all on some of these deferred ones to make sure the language is consistent and reconciled so that they're simple as possible. The homework was to look at both the consent list and everything else we didn't talk about, and we need to hear from you which ones of those things are you not comfortable being consent? Because the proposal from the chair was to move everything else to consent unless you speak up. And staff will participate in that too. So there's a couple others that are flagged already as staff wanting to talk about. So not everything will be consent, but we're trying to whittle down the discussion to something that will fit in the time we have on the 14th so that you can vote.
So we should express our discomfort by the 7th?
And actually, I amended, the 7th is, it says on your handout the 3rd, but the 7th is a week before. So the 7th is your deadline to express discomfort with anything else in here. You don't need to express comfort.
Okay, I won't.
If you don't just express, if you don't speak up about an amendment, staff to,
We'll remain discomfortable.
it will be put on the consent agenda and we'll vote on it through that. 69 and 70 we will have a discussion on.
Yeah, so the deferred items we've already deferred, we will have a discussion. And then the question that we may not be able to settle until we get through it is whether you're actually going to take a final vote on the whole thing on the 14th. And that's the desire, but it may depend on how many of those items get pulled. It could be carried over to the 28th, but we will let you know, of course, how many are on the agenda and whether we think that will work. But our hope is that you can actually vote on the whole thing on the 14th.
I won't be here the 20th.
PAL division briefing. So we have more time on the 14th, correct? And is that a 2.5 hours? It's a daytime meeting.
Okay, Mike, you had a question?
Well, I just hope we do it on the 14th. I won't be here on the 20th. I just wanted to give a heads up, everybody. I gave 3 additional glossary items. Just want to make sure those got into the
Yeah, I'll
mix.
put that in the addendum with the additional ones that.
Mike, were those today?
Were
those today?
Yeah, I wrote down also that we would crosswalk the
Yeah, I got it.
anti-displacement provisions to these amendments so that you can.
So are we clear? Oh, Susan.
One more item. So in your desire to ensure that everybody gets to vote on the 14th, I want to make sure that you're not putting things on consent that you do actually want to talk about. I don't want us being, having anyone say later that we rushed this through just to get it done on the 14th so that, certain people, different folks could be there. It's not just you, Mike. So, no, because I think that that could be a concern. And so throwing things on consent, we don't want to do willy-nilly, if that were a phrase anyone still used. But we want to make sure that you're looking at these items carefully and making a decision whether to talk about them or not. That's all.
And I would say if you have a concern about an item, pick up the phone or shoot an email to that person and see if you can work it out potentially before you get here, so that it, it may be something they just didn't think about or willing to agree with you on.
So a few days before once we get all your list of what you want to talk about, we will issue some kind of addendum sheet that lists any of those compromises that have come together. And I would also add that there's a few more that we didn't talk about tonight where staff raised an objection, so we will be contacting the sponsor to try and work something out on those as well.
Okie dokie.
Okay, but I would agree with Susan. This is, I know more than ever, horse to the barn here. We can see the light, but let's take our time and truly do the work in a deliberative process. And if we've got to go to the 28th,
I'll Skype.
well, I know you're not in a hurry, Howard, but
I'll Skype in as long as I don't have to look at Gary Oxman for 6
So
hours. 6 long hours.
It would be good that we could, at the end of this, feel good about the process. And so that's the most important part, I think, from that
Please,
standpoint.
Julie, please, move the camera, please.
Okay. Thank you for staying a little bit extra.
Yep, good job.
Thank you. We are adjourned.